GNOSTICC is SMM. Gnosticism is a form of perception. What do we mean when we say Gnosticism is a form of perception? To truly understand the Gnostic vision, it is important to grasp what Gnosticism is and not to be bogged down in various historical manifestations of the Gnostic way of looking at things. Gnosis literally means wisdom but does not mean book learning, even tradition. It is a direct experience of the divine, the flash of wisdom that is brought when we meet God face to face. Certainly Gnosticism has certain key motifs, certain perennial ideals, which we will examine in the course of this book. However, we must appreciate that there are Gnostic trends in most religious traditions. Whether we are talking about Odin on the world tree and his flash of wisdom as he grasped the runes, or whether we are talking on the mystic achieving wisdom after days of penance and fasting, both are essentially Gnostic. In some ways, the best way to appreciate Gnosticism is to use the metaphor of algebra. Algebra is a branch of mathematics that uses letters etc. to represent numbers and quantities. Algebraic is ultimately from Arabic al-jab, reunion of broken parts. Pocket Oxford Dictionary. It may be thought that algebra has little similarity to spirituality. However, if we consider it more closely, they have much in common. Algebra uses letters to represent actions and numbers. It is a system of representation and, in a sense, symbolism. This is also the case with spirituality. Spirituality uses symbols to stand for realities. It uses images to represent things that cannot be easily imagined or explained. The problem is that algebra is an academic form of mathematics and has little effect on everyday life, while spirituality controls and influences us more than we would care to admit. Only by removing religious iconography from the realm of the emotions and appreciating it as a symbol system, as a form of divine algebra, can we really understand its nature. The Gnostic Handbook is one application, one representational system for the ancient Gnosis. It can be seen in many forms and using many symbol systems. Accordingly, it is important to realize the difference between the representational letter and the thing that is represented, between the essence and the form. The Institute hence differentiates between its philosophical works, such as Gnostic Theurgy, and its religious works, such as the Gnostic Handbook. To give an example, while all Gnostic traditions agree on the universe being in some sense dualistic, there are many divergent ways of expressing this dualism and even more ways to understand. Some Gnostic schools have two: a true and false God, one the essence behind all things, the other a demiurge or false creators. Others see the dualism as relative and only existing between man's perception, ignorance, and the truth. While all of these representational systems are diff. The Gnostic Handbook, page 7. Ferent, their essential message is the same. In algebraic terms, while the letters vary, the numbers they represent are identical. This should be kept in mind while studying this handbook. It is one and one only interpretation of the essential Gnostic wisdom. The aim of using algebra, according to the Arabs, was to have a better understanding of the real nature of the equation, to find the essential form through the many shards or forms. This too is the vision of the Gnosis. The Arabic meaning of algebra is pregnant with meaning, the reunion of broken parts. The sources of our tradition. The Gnostic tradition is one that has spanned millenniums. It represents the height of the religious traditions of humanity. Its primary points of focus are found within Vedic philosophy, Zoroastrianism, Greek mystery traditions, Old World religions, pagan and heathen, and Gnosticism. The Gnostic tradition is not culturally locked within the Christian tradition as many modern exponents seem to profess. It is a pan-Gnostic tradition, which spans many traditions and cultural milieus. The primary assumption of the Gnostic tradition is that at some point in the dim reaches of time there was a primal universal religion. This religion diversified as man spread across the earth and different cultures and nationalities development. Accordingly, remnants of this perennial philosophy are found within the various traditions, belief systems, and faiths. These faiths, rather than being the primary sources of wisdom within themselves, are actually remnants of one earlier and more pristine school of knowledge. As time progressed, the higher kingdoms saw the loss of Gnosis and therefore chose to restore the structure of the mysteries. When Jesus came of age within the Essenes, he purified the structure of the mystery traditions and reinstated the original Gnostic faith. Hence, the Gnosticism of Jesus is not superior to other Gnostic traditions, but is a refinement or adaptation of an age-long tradition. Indeed, the Gnosticism of Jesus brought together Egyptian, Greek, and mystery cult traditions, such as those of Eleusis and Mithra, into one coherent system. The iconography of Judaism played a small part but was insignificant in comparison to, for example, the Greek mystery cult tradition. To understand this nexus of the Gnosis, we really need to jettison the old model which sees Gnosticism as a Jewish or Christian heresy. As has been documented in such texts as the Jesus Mystery and Jesus Christ, Son of God +++++++, it is more likely that Rabbinic Judaism and Christianity are pagan and Gnostic heresies. While there may be vigorous complaints and denials, it is now even well known that so-called Jewish Kabbalah primarily derived from a reworking of Neoplatonic mysticism which into Jewish religious language. These teachings, however, did not remain available forever. As society changed and a new regime came to power, the teachings of Jesus were suppressed and replaced with the political faith of Emperor Constantine, and accordingly the Gnosis went underground to ensure its survival. What we have in today's religious movements are not the original forms of Judaism and Christianity, but apostate faiths masquerading in their place. The Bible itself has been tampered with too. The Gnostic Handbook, page 8. Such an extent that only through much critical study can we restore just some of its inner meaning. The Institute upholds the original inner teachings of Jesus as part of a continuum of wisdom which spans from pagan to so-called Christian sources. But it is perhaps desirable to state unequivocally that the teachings here, however fragmentary and incomplete, belong neither to the Hindus, the Zoroastrian, the Chaldean, nor the Egyptian religion, nor to Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, or Christianity exclusively. The secret doctrine is the essence of all these. The secret doctrine, Madame Blavatsky. Behind the veil of all the hieratic and mystical allegories of ancient doctrines, behind the darkness and strange ordeals of all initiations, under the deal of all sacred writings, in the ruins of Nineveh or Thebes, on the crumbling stones of old temples and on the blackened visage of the Assyrian or Egyptian Sphinx, in the monstrous or marvelous paintings which interpret to the faithful of India the inspired pages of the Vedas, in the cryptic emblems of our old books on alchemy, in the ceremonies practiced at receptions of all secret societies. There are found indications of a doctrine which is everywhere the same and everywhere carefully concealed, the key of all divine obscurities and the absolute queen of society in those ages when it was reserved exclusively for the education of priests and kings. Transcendental magic, Eliphas Levi. Gnosticism and other ways of knowing. In these days of science, technology, and the rule of rationalism, it is hard to grasp the ancient view of wisdom. Knowledge was not simply to know about something, but to know something, to appreciate its place within the living cosmos, the great chain of being. The scientific model, with its emphasis on experimentation and materialism, removed man from his place within a living universe and replaced it with a universe of dead and inert substances. Experimentation was used to buttress a belief in the scientific method, yet the scientific method was a system based on self-delusion. Experimentation is used to prove the results of a given thesis. The experiments created are those which fulfill the requirements of the thesis, others are rejected. A simple mathematical example can be used. If the hypothesis or answer is 7, we can use experimentation to prove the data. The answer, however, could be 4 plus 3, 6 plus 1, or 5 plus 2, depending on how you want the result. The data is selectively chosen. The scientific approach hence is self-referencing. It demands the acceptance of certain predefined ideals, such as evolution, progress, and the supremacy of the experimental method, and then molds the data consciously. The Gnostic Handbook, page 9. Or unconsciously, to fulfill the data. Critiques of the scientific method are many, but for the observant the results of the scientific method are most pronounced when he looks at the world itself. The results of unbridled science and rationalism are illustrated in our consumer society, our unquenchable thirst for technology and progress at all costs, and the resulting polluted and dying continents. Materialism, rationalism, and fundamentalism go hand in hand. Once you reject the possibility of a wisdom, gnosis, that is greater than the collective psyche of man, then the mind becomes the point of reference. Ethics become irrelevant, as do spiritual values and principles. In their place appear the relativism of the modern society, whose primary focus is on progress. If you couple this with the disposing of religion by Darwinian science, then man is reduced to animal, no more, no less, and his behavior and values come to reflect this unconscious revelation. Fundamentalism is, in some sense, the encroachment of rationalism into the religious field. Mysticism and esotericism, inner teachings, are rejected in favor of doctrines and beliefs that can be understood by a blinkered use of the rational mind. While fundamentalism is ambivalent to the intellect, it uses a restricted form of rationalism to hold its doctrines in place. Accordingly, fundamentalism is most prevalent in religions of the book Protestantism, Islam, and so forth. While other forms of fundamentalism exist, the most pernicious forms are those which, in reaction to materialism and scientism, use rationalism to create a stalwart of dogma and doctrine, and yet in the process destroy the very foundation of the true religious vision, mysticism. To appreciate the esoteric and mystical view of truth, we need to travel back to ancient Greece and examine the allegory of the cave as used by Plato. This allegory, beyond all others, offers us a real insight into the problem of what truth is. Plato sees all of humanity as prisoners. Each of us has been kept chained in a subterranean cavern from birth, facing a dark wall. Only a very small amount of light enters the cavern, and this comes from a small opening high overhead. Because of our chains, we look in opposite direction and hence can only observe the dark shadows which pass along the wall we are facing. These shadows are cast by the men and occurrences of the upper world beyond the overhead opening. Our perceptions and hence of the shadows and reflections. Plato's major contemplation was on what would occur if one of us escaped from the cave. Plato's answer is found in his work The Republic, where Socrates tells us that at first the escaped prisoner would be blinded by the strength of the light of the upper world and would retreat back to the shadows. But only for a while. He would need, then, to grow accustomed before he could see things in that upper world. At first it would be easiest to make out shadows, and then the images of men and things reflected in water, and later on the things themselves. After that, it would be easier to watch the heavenly bodies and the sky itself by night, looking at the light of the moon and stars rather than the sun and the sun's light in the daytime. Last of all, he would be able to look at the sun and contemplate its nature, not as it appears when reflected in water or any alien medium, but as it is in itself. The Gnostic Handbook, page 10. In its own domain. And now he would begin to draw the conclusion that it is the sun that produces the seasons and the course of the year and controls everything in the visible world, and moreover is in a way the cause of all that he and his companions used to see. Republic, Plato, 516 ff. Plato, then, is illustrating for us the state of man. His insight is clear and precise. Man is chained by his attachment to his perceptions, which are based on materialism and rationalism. The only reality he sees is a reflection, and this reflection creates an illusionary world around him. The true source of what he perceives is found in the world of ideals, and yet he cannot even contemplate this source, since his view of reality is conditioned by his belief in the primacy of the material world. The world of ideals is the real source of wisdom, but to appreciate this world, we must expand our understanding of reality from the limited perceptions of sense to a multifaceted universe of many dimensions and realities. We must move from the mountains of earth to the great chain of being. This chain of being, we will discuss further in this work. In the meantime, we need to consider what it means in regards to how we understand truth or gnosis. The religious systems, ideologies, and movements which have evolved within the history of man are reflections, distortions, and adaptations of the truth which exists unsullied in the world of ideals. Rather than truth having evolved and developed, as some would tell us, truth has dissipated as time has moved away from the first point of creation. Accordingly, like a stone thrown in a pool, we see the ripples through time but do not comprehend the first event. As we have moved further and further away from the Golden Age, the ripples have become more and more distorted until now, in the Age of the Wolf, they have dissipated into the pool of illusions. Religions, ideologies, and movements are hence exoteric. Exoteric of philosophical doctrines, treatises, modes of speech, etc., designed for or suitable to the generality of disciples, communicated to outsiders, intelligible to the public. Hence of disciples, etc. Belonging to the outer circle, not admitted to the esoteric teaching. Oxford English Dictionary. Esotericism, the inner teachings, are elusive and hard to find. They have been passed from mouth to ear through brotherhoods, sects, and orders. They do not evolve. While their appearance may change from age to age, they exist as memories and reflections, transmissions from the Golden Age, the equivalent in time to the world of ideals through history. While esotericism can take any form from Hindu to Buddhist, Christian to Islamic, it is at the core, distinct from each. It is trans-temporal, and yet being in time takes the appearance of the country, tradition, or. The Gnostic Handbook, page 11. Epic it is clothed by. At the same time, we must appreciate the form it takes. Esotericism is not ecumenical. It is dangerous to assume that all esoteric traditions are the same. Islamic esotericism, Sufism, is distinct from Buddhist esotericism, and while both are part of the lore, they should not be mixed and combined into some kind of occult eclectic soup. While at the core esotericism is unified gnosis, in time, in history, and in our experience it takes many forms and has many appearances, and these must be appreciated for what they are. Similarities are noted, comparisons are useful, but we must not believe that similar systems are the same. Esotericism and modern language. When we consider the gnosis, an important issue regarding language arises. The issue is that many, perhaps most, of the concepts, beliefs, and mental structures we have are artificial. They have evolved as the society around us would like them to evolve. Hence, to really understand the gnosis, there is a great need for you to put aside your preconceptions. This will be difficult as so many words have connotations which have been deliberately programmed to have us react in certain ways. We have developed certain understandings of philosophy, religion, democracy, politics, etc. All of which may or may not be true, but nevertheless all of which probably originated from the system around us rather than from within the perennial tradition. It is always important to realize the extent to which language can be molded to suit different worldviews and used to create specific reactions and impressions. In some ways we might agree with the discussion in Alice in Wonderland between Humpty Dumpty and Alice. When I use a word, Humpty Dumpty said, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. The question is, said Alice, whether you can make words mean so many different things. The question is, said Humpty, which is to be the master, that's all. Through the Looking Glass. Lewis Carroll. To appreciate the gnosis you will need to put aside your beliefs and assumptions and reconsider most of what you have been taught. It is imperative that you understand the terms we use in the context they are used in. Many of the words and concepts we present, though obviously from the English language or more especially from the language of esotericism, have little or no connection to the concepts of the same name in the modern usage. Now, stop for a moment and consider the fact that we have already used a number of these programmed buzzwords. Occult, esoteric, exoteric, reincarnation, gnosis, mystery teachings. The Gnostic Handbook, page 12. In each of these will trigger a certain association for you. For example, you would probably relate the term occult to something sinister and evil, and yet the word itself simply means hidden. Members of the medical profession, for example, use the term occult bleeding for bleeding which comes from an unknown source. Hardly sinister or demonic, I would suggest. Again and again, we must emphasize that to understand and appreciate the esoteric worldview, you need to put aside the associations, prejudices, and preconceptions you have and consider new meanings for the terms that are used. It is important for you to understand the language we use in the context of how we use it, and not in terms of prevailing religious terminology. We are not asking you to just accept everything we say or blindly agree with our redefinition of old terms. What we are asking you to is temporarily suspend disbelief, enter into your studies with us, and only make a decision after you have seen the whole picture. So let's consider some of the terms we have used and will use. The term gnosis comes from the Greek word meaning to know, but it means the process through which the seeker of spiritual wisdom experiences the divine and is transformed. The teachings which make this transformation possible are considered mystery teachings because they embody the most ancient wisdom, the essential essence behind the world's religious and ideological systems. In this sense, they are esoteric, eso meaning inner, they are the inner teachings that are behind or beyond the secular, they are core religious wisdom available to the few. They are occult in that they are secret, hidden, or unknown. They are religious in the sense that religion means to bind back, to return to the source or origin. These teachings are those which lead back to the world of ideals from which we have become alienated. CHHIAPT TRRTWOO THEEGREA at TCHHI and N of FBA and ING. The reference point for modern man is the material world. He judges life by his perceptions and acts accordingly. His life is hence governed by physical desires and materials requirements. This way of life, whether it be Western consumerism or Marxist materialism, was created by the development of the Western, scientific worldview, whereby man was removed from his place at the center of the universe and reduced to his new status as an evolved monkey. Beginning in the 19th century, some would argue earlier, prevailing ideologies began to jettison God, spirituality, and the medieval worldview and replace superstition with a scientific model based on matter, evolution, and technology coupled with a belief in progress. This new scientific model was in as a direct contradiction of the earlier, traditional model, which was based on the great chain of being. This great chain is the traditional view of the universe, which is not locked in a simple, nuts and bolts view, but which encompasses the great span of existence from the very heights of spirit to the depths of the infernal realms. The great chain of being, while expressed in many cultures, is not doctrinally specific. It can be found in Hindu, Buddhist, Platonic, Christian, and mystical cosmology. It is found throughout literature, from myth and legend to the visions of Dante. The plan and structure of the world, which through the Middle Ages and down to the late 18th century most educated men were to accept without question the conception of the universe as a great chain of being, composed of an immense or infinite number of links ranging in hierarchical order from the meagerest kinds of existence, through every possible grade up to the ens perfectissimum. Great chain of being, Arthur Lovejoy. Modern man's vision of reality can be seen like those locked into Plato's cave. He perceives only shadows and presumes these to be real. This is far more dangerous than we admit, for if we limit our reality to our sense alone, then we remove all possibility of ethical or spiritual insight and reduce existence to material banality. While psychology may wish to somewhat expand our horizons by positing spiritual equivalents within the mind, it is still reductionist, and everything is referenced back to the senses and the material world. If it is from matter we come, then to matter we shall return. A useful allegory may be that of a chess game. The pieces move and we assume they do so of their own volition. We may build complex theories regarding their movements, even creating laws and theories to explain why they move in certain ways. We can classify the different pieces. The Gnostic Handbook, page 14. And marvel at their characteristics. However, due to our own limitations, we cannot conceptualize that someone or something may be moving them. Flatland. 2. The inhabitants of space in general and HC in particular. This work is dedicated by a humble native of Flatland, in the hope that even as he was initiated into the mysteries of 3 dimensions, having been previously conversant with only 2, so the citizens of that celestial region may aspire yet higher and higher to the secrets of 4, 5, or even 6 dimensions, thereby contributing to the enlargement of the imagination and the possible development of that most and excellent gift of modesty among the superior races of solid humanity. Preface to Flatland. If we for a moment accept the reality of the great chain of being, then we can theorize that the universe is multidimensional and has many levels of existence. If we consider this for a moment and ponder how real our dimension seems to us, then perhaps other levels would be perceived as concrete and real as our own from within their own vantage point. This very concept was the basis of a fascinating story written by Edwin A. Abbott in 1884 called Flatland. Originally published under the pseudonym of Mr. A. Square, it was found to be the work of an English clergyman and Shakespearean scholar, whose fascination with mathematics led him to publish this tale. The importance of Flatland is that it helps us conceptualize the possibility of altered dimensions from the perspective of geometry. Now, I am not Edwin Abbott, and hence, I cannot paraphrase his story in a way he would appreciate, but I can give you the gist of the tale. I would also suggest you go buy a copy. It has been reprinted by Dover Books and is available in a very economical edition. Imagine a world of only 2 dimensions, a world of beings who only know, across and side to side, and have no knowledge whatsoever of up and down. These entities live in a diverse world of squares, triangles, circles, as well as many other nationalities. They live in a world much like our own, except for one thing: they are flat. Imagine one day Mr. Square enters the Gnostic Handbook, page 15. His flat home, walks across to his flat lounge and sits down, however that is possible in 2 dimensions, and begins to read an even flatter book. Suddenly a voice comes to him from another dimension. This voice is actually coming from Mr. Jones, a traveler from the dimension of up, but Mr. Square does not know this. Mr. Square cannot see him because up does not exist for Mr. Square. All he experiences is a loud bellowing, but disembodied voice. Mr. Square, by now obviously terrified, demands that this being makes himself known to him. Mr. Jones, with the aim to oblige and enter into interdimensional communication, lowers himself towards the ground in Mr. Square's home. Mr. Square cannot see the totality of Mr. Jones. All he sees is the points and lines of Mr. Jones' body where they connect to the 2-dimensional lines of his lounge room. Mr. Square comes quickly to the conclusion that he is communicating with a weird selection of lines and points. From this conclusion, he decides he is either quite mad or that he has had a little too much to drink from his flat bottle of gin. Mr. Jones is not happy. He does not like to be thought of as a weird and disjointed collection of lines and points. He grasps Mr. Square on his two-dimensional shirt and lifts him into the air. Mr. Square is ecstatic and very confused. Where is he? He has no idea of the dimension of up and hence cannot understand the experience. As he begins to hover above the ground, he sees his friends below, but they cannot see him. However, as he returns to his two-dimensional world, at the moment of contact he reappears, seemingly out of nowhere. He tries to explain, but how can they understand dimensions beyond their two-dimensional perception? This tale illustrates the hypothesis of other dimensions. If we attempt to translate a cube into two dimensions, we know that what we arrive at is nothing but a reflection or an approximation. We know that in a cube all lines are of the same length, yet, in a two-dimensional representation, the length of the lines seem to vary. According to modern geometry, if we take a cube and apply it into a further dimension, we arrive at what is known as a tesseract. This cannot be illustrated as it exists in four dimensions. All we can see is its reflection as a cube inside a cube. Theoretically, however, we know it exists. Giving some consideration to this tale, we may begin to hypothesize about various planes, dimensions, worlds, or orders of existence. If we project our cube into higher dimensions, we can create an infinite progression until we reach some final point of conclusion. In the ancient traditions, this has been known for a long time, and while the number of levels or planes may vary depending on the esoteric tradition, the model, the great chain of being, remains remarkably the same. In the words of Arthur Lovejoy, author of The Great Chain of Being, the great chain of being has been the dominant official philosophy of the larger part of civilized mankind through most of its history. The traditional model of the universe. That sign is the sign of the cross, which very clearly represents the manner of achievement of this realization by the perfect communion of all the states of the being, harmoniously and conformably ranked, in integral expansion, in the double sense of amplitude and exaltation. In fact, this double expansion of the Gnostic Handbook, page 16. Being may be regarded as taking place horizontally on the one hand, that is, at a certain given level or degree of existence, and vertically on the other, that is, in the hierarchical superimposition of all the degrees. Thus, the horizontal direction represents amplitude, or integral extension of the individuality taken as basis for realization, an extension which consists in the indefinite development of a given group of possibilities subject to certain special conditions of manifestation, and it should be clearly understood that in the case of the human being, this extension is in no very confined to the corporeal part of the individuality, but includes all its modalities, of which the corporeal state is properly only one. The vertical direction represents the hierarchy, likewise in a fortiori indefinite, of the multiple states, each of which, when similarly considered in its integrality, is one of those groups of possibilities corresponding to one of the worlds, or degrees, which are included in the total synthesis of universal man. In this cruciform representation, the horizontal expansion therefore corresponds to the indefinitude of possible modalities of one and the same state of the being, regarded integrally, and the vertical superimposition to the indefinite series of states of the total being. Symbolism of the cross, René Guénon. If we wish to conceptualize the great chain of being, there is a simple place to start. Let us begin by viewing material life as a horizontal line. On this line we have everyday existence. We could even use two lines to refer to the influences of time and space. In any event, these occurrences are horizontal. They exist within the experience of time, space, and matter, and hence exist on the material line. At the same time, we can suggest this line is intersected by another, a vertical line, the line of spirit. Whereas the horizontal moves from life to death, beginning to end, and repeats again and again, the vertical moves from alpha to omega, from the heights to the depths. This image, the cross, is the primal image of the great chain of being in traditional cosmology. It is pregnant with meaning, and within it are the central concepts of Gnosticism. If we consider the cross and the intersection between the spiritual and the material, we can also contemplate the variations in ideals between these two extremes. The material emphasizes the physical, material and quantitative, while the spiritual emphasizes spiritual, ethereal and qualitative. The vertical line represents ethics, content and meaning. The horizontal represents results, activity and relativity. The interface between these two lines is within the sacred center. It is from this center that we can begin to unfold some of the major concepts of the traditional view of the world. The sacred center is the point where man touches the divine and can come under the influence of the spiritual world while existing within the physical. It is only at this nexus that enlightenment is possible. The Gnostic Handbook, page 17. If we consider the image of the cross, we can delineate certain characteristics. There is the sacred center, the vertical line becomes the axis mundi, the horizontal line becomes the earth, above which are the supernal worlds, below which are the infernal. This map of the living cosmos is central to the sacred lore. While it may take many forms in the traditions that abound on planet Earth, the essential characteristics are the same. When applied to traditional models of the universe, the horizontal bar of the cross becomes the earth, Midgard, physical reality, and the axis mundi becomes the pillar that spans the worlds. It is sometimes images as a vertical series of planes, worlds or dimension, a tree, a ray, the ray of creation of Gurdjieff, or a pillar. Indeed, it is the beanstalk that Jack climbed to reach the world of the giants. The axis mundi and the sacred tree. The axis mundi is the pillar, and at its center is the nexus of earth. The earth turns on this center and its horizontal, physical, reality is formed. The turning marks the cycle of time. If you are calm, clear-headed, and rationally decisive, people say you are well-centered or focused. In that saying is our instinctive recognition that everything has its proper center, which is also its essence. The essence of an individual, one center and citadel, is the mind. But it is not the ultimate center. The idea of a fixed center and a continually moving periphery has many illustrations. It is like a wheel turning on an axle, a rope swung round a vertical pole, a compass making a circle. A grander cosmological image is of a spherical universe with the spherical earth at its center, both revolving upon the same unmoving pivot, the world pole. In all traditional systems of religion, this image has provided the dominant symbol. At the center of the world, John Mitchell. Thames and Hudson, 1994. Working from this model, we can go further and delineate the characteristic of the axis mundi or cosmic tree. The cosmic tree can be imaged in two different manners, organic and emanation. The organic model is found in most pagan and heathen traditions. It emphasizes the change-some nature of the worlds and planes. The emanation model is more formal, and while it infers the ever-changing landscape of spirit, it has more clearly delineated worlds, planes, and inhabitants. Whichever we use, both have certain general motifs which are the basis for the great chain of being. The Gnostic Handbook, page 18. Characteristics of the traditional model. The first is the point of origin. This is only described in negative terms by what it is not. The second is considered the upper world. It is sometimes imaged as the world of the gods, but in a Gnostic system we prefer a more impersonal description. This world includes any number of original principles. It is the higher reaches of Plato's world of ideals. In the general Gnostic theosophic tradition, it has a triune principle. Within the triune principle is the power of polarity. This is important as it gives rise to the sexual polarity of most pagan traditions and the balance between mind and intuition in others. The third is the other world. It is an intermediate reality and is comprised of any number of planes, worlds, or locales. These can be described in semi-analytic terms as planes or dimensions, or in more organic terms as worlds, halls, or localities. The fourth is the earth or the physical world. The fifth is the underworld, the realm of the dead. In most organic models, this is seen inside or below the earth. In the emanation models, it is usually related to the moon and seen above or around the earth. The third, fourth, and fifth characteristics are more noticeable in organic models. In emanation models, they tend to be included within a gradient of states or worlds. These can be any number, but in the Gnostic theosophic approach tends to be 7. To fully appreciate these characteristics, we shall take some case studies of specific cultural maps which outline the traditional model of the universe. The Neoplatonic cosmos. One of the pivotal figures within the history of traditional cosmology is Plato. While before him both Pythagoras and Socrates are of great significance, it was Plato who outlined the major characteristic of the great chain of being ideals. For Plato, an ideal was more than just a notion or idea. Ideals existed eternally in the world of ideals, similar to the Gnostic pleroma, and had eternal, abstract qualities. It is from this world of ideals the lower worlds emanate, resulting in the physical world. Platonism, Neoplatonism, and Gnosticism argue between themselves in regards to the nature of matter. While all posit a demiurge which created the material dimensions, the nature of this being, from demonic to malefic bungling to a demigod, depends on the school and sect. Plutarch, 45 to 125 AD, for example, posited a negative world soul, demiurge, and hence heralded a reconciliation between Platonic and Gnostic thought. When the Platonic model was combined with Pythagorean mathematics, a hierarchical structure re. The Gnostic Handbook, page 19. Salted. This early model, which spanned the universe from the all to matter, was probably the map from which later Kabbalah and medieval occult schematics evolved. Plotinus, a classic Neoplatonist, outlined a map which was founded on the indescribable one, En, who is the causeless cause. Plotinus also called it the good and the first God, protos theos. Below En is a series of hypostasis or emanations which make up the great chain of being. Below En is the nous or God's thought, in which exist the Platonic forms of archetypes. From nous emanates soul, psyche, and then psyche emanates the world soul and individual souls. The world soul has higher and lower natures, one of which is the archetype of nature, physis. It is from physis that the material world emanates. The three primary emanations of En, nous and psyche form the nexus of Plotinus system. In terms of R characterizes, this model includes the indescribable one, first C, protos theos, nous and psyche, second C, Platonic archetypes, third C, the world is emanated by psyche, fourth C, while the underworld is hidden within nature which has its own consciousness, physis. This dualism between the spiritual and physical we will return to later. The two aspects of the world soul are one of the most important misunderstood aspects of Gnosticism. Theosophical and modern maps. The theosophical map is found in many New Age and spiritual books. Most of these have adapted and distorted the model and not really come to grips with the full depth of the vision held by me, Blavatsky, and others such as Steiner, Alice Bailey, and Max Heindel. This map was developed by Madame Blavatsky and from the theosophical movement migrated into a range of cosmologies. It is found adapted in systems ranging from Max Heindel's Rosicrucian cosmo-conception to the work of Rudolf Steiner and Alice Bailey. In theosophy and related traditions, there is an original nothing or absence, first C, a triune principle of will, the word and wisdom, second C, and a series of 7 planes which bring together the other characteristics. The underworld is subsumed within the astral plane, which is Heindel's desire plane. The 7 planes according to the Rosicrucian cosmo-conception, Heindel. Divine plane. Plane of virgin spirits. Plane of divine spirit. Plane of life spirit. Plane of thought. Desire plane. Physical world. The Gnostic Handbook, page 20. While this model may be useful, especially in the creation of resonances or correspondences between phenomena, for example, relating 7 planes to the 7 bodies of man, 7 colors and rays, etc., it can also be counter-traditional and reductionist. The tendency is to use the 7 planes in a standard, scientific chart and ignore the more organic view that was held of the planes in early theosophy. In the next chapter we will examine this in more detail and consider it in terms of the Gnostic tradition. The Kabbalistic Tree of Life. The Kabbalah is a system of some controversy. It has been heralded as the greatest mystical system of all, handed down by Moses and guarded by the Jewish people. The problem with this largely mythical tale is that the Kabbalah was not developed till at least the 6th century AD and incorporated Greek and Gnostic images, forms and traditions. Indeed, it has been suggested by both Barbara Thiering and Gershom Scholem that the very image of the Tree of Life was derived from Greek rather than archaic Jewish mystical sources. While the Kabbalah is of course overlaid with imagery of Old Testament, Jewish, Christian, and sometimes Gnostic layers, it is primarily a Greek Neoplatonic model. The tree starts with nothing, the great void or emptiness behind all things. This is known as Ein. First C. Ein at various cycles moves through transformative stages and manifests 3 principles. Second C. Kether the divine will Chokmah the Logos Bina Sophia, Saturn. We have deliberately chosen Gnostic names here to prepare you for their use in our Gnostic model of the universe as presented in the next chapter. Chokmah and Bina also form the polarity of male and female principles which give birth to the rest of the Tree of Life. They could also be easily related to the fire and ice of Yggdrasil. Geburah Mars. Chesed Jupiter. Tifereth Sun. Hod Mercury. Netzach Venus. Yesod Moon. Malkuth Earth. These planes are world, which can be related to planets and realities bring together the remaining. The Gnostic Handbook, page 21. Characteristics with the astral plane at the moon and the earth at the base. There are many attributions related to the Kabbalah, and as a system of classification it is extremely useful. Again, we must avoid the tendency towards reductionism and see the centers more as a landscape in which townships meld into each other rather than in a classification scheme from a biology textbook. Yggdrasil, the world tree. 9 world I can count, 9 roots of the tree. Thalapsa. 9 lays of power I learned from Bolthorn, Bestla's father. Odin in the Havamal. Yggdrasil is a prime example of the organic model of the great chain of being. In the Elder Edda, Yggdrasil is identified as a sacred ash tree. It becomes obvious that this is no ordinary tree but a tree which glyphs the worlds and which encompasses many stratas of reality. In the Grimnismal, Yggdrasil is described as having 3 great roots. One lies under Hell, the realm of the dead, under another dwell the giants, and under the third live human beings. A squirrel runs along its branches, an eagle nets in its crown, 4 deer browse on its branches, and a dragon gnaws at its roots. In the Volupsa, the sacred ash is described as very tall, always green and moist, the source of dew, and as having the well of destiny, Erd, as its roots. At Ragnarok, the towering ash trembles, and the world tree howls. The ash is of all the trees the biggest and the best. Its branches spread out over all the world and extend across the sky. 3 of the tree's roots support it and extend very, very far. One is among the Aesir, the second among the frost giants, where Ginnungagap once was. The third extends over Niflheim, and under that root is Havergelmir, and Nidhogg gnaws the bottom of the root. Gylfaginning, Younger Edda, Snorri Sturluson. Trans. Anthony Fox. Yggdrasil is one of the more poetic and expressive images of the great chain of being. In some forms of northern worship it was celebrated with a gigantic pillar, one of which, Irminsul, was renowned for its size but was destroyed by Charlemagne in his attempted conversion of the Saxons in the 8th century. From the world tree extends 9 worlds or realms, 5 of which are on the central axis and 4 in the directions. Pathways link all the worlds with the central axis. The Gnostic Handbook, page 22. The system of 9 rather than 7 duplicates the principles of fire and ice as distinct worlds. This is not found in later models of the universe such as the Anglo-Saxon. The world in the center is called Midgard. The word Gard means dwelling. It is obviously related to the word garden. Midgard is Middle-earth, the garden in which X live our lives. It includes the physical world as it is perceived by our senses. Encircling Midgard is the world serpent. 4th C. Niflheim is the realm of ice and darkness, while Muspelheim is the world of fire and heat. The interaction between fire and ice, Niflheim and Muspelheim, 2nd C, is a major dynamic within the activity of the world tree. This interaction occurs in Ginnungagap, 1st C, an empty abyss, where the fire of Muspelheim meets of the icy rivers of Niflheim, and from this dynamic the giant Ymir is born. Odin and his brother, born from giants, carve up the body of Ymir to create Midgard. Ymir's bones become the mutanes, his teeth the rocks, his blood the rivers, his skull the vault of the sky, his hair the forests and grasses. Like the Titans, Ymir's death creates mankind. Hence Midgard is a checkerboard on which fire and ice battle against each other until the game is completed. From the interaction of fire and ice within the Great Gap, the planes or worlds are formed. This model, when examined critically, we will return to it in the next lesson, has a lot in common with the Kabbalah and Theosophical plane models. Together they give us a good overview of the great chain of being. The planes are world below the triune forces of the void, fire and ice are. Vanaheim is the world of the Vanir. It is the realm of fertility, wealth and fecundity, fields of luscious crops, fruits, wildlife and pastoral beauty. Jotunheim is the home of the giants. There are 3 types of giants, Thursar, Rises and Edens, all children of Ymir. Losafheim is the home of the light elves or Lodrosalfar. There are 2 classes of elves, the light inhabit the lighter realms above Midgard, while the dark elves, dwarfs, inhabit the subterranean realm. Asgard, the home of the Aesir of sky gods, is above the elven world and as the crown of the world tree. The name Asgard means enclosure of the gods. Within Asgard is Valhalla, the hall of the fallen, where the warriors of Odin are taken if they are killed in battle, and from where they will return to the final battle or Ragnarok. Snorri Sturluson describes an inner enclosure, Gard, as being built right within the center of Midgard, the sacred space of human society. However, this enclosure, this true essence of Midgard as Asgard, can only be entered by crossing the Bifrost. The Gnostic Handbook, page 23. Within Asgard is also the halls of the gods. These are 12 in number, and many relate them to the ideals or forms which are related through the zodiac. Between Asgard and Midgard is the Rainbow Bridge or Bifrost, a secret path which is taken by the gods when they join council meetings of the Council of the Gods at the Well of Erd. It is guarded by Heimdall. The above worlds, including Asgard, are considered facets of the other world, third sea, while the underworld, fifth sea, includes those below. Svartalheim is the realm of the dark elves which exist in the subterranean world under Midgard. They are also known as dwarves. In the lower realms of the underworld lies Hell, the realm of the dead. The worlds are traditionally listed as the Gap plus 9 worlds. These correlated well with the model we will discuss in the next chapter, where there is a triplicity above, void, fire and ice, and 7 worlds below. Each of these models offers us a glimpse of traditional cosmology in action. Concepts such as the Axis Mundi, Sacred Center, Midgard, and the various worlds are delineated. Each of the models we have presented, albeit in brief form, offer different views of the great chain of being. Most have much in common. In our next chapter we will offer a Gnostic model of the universe using these examples to expand and refine what the great chain of being means to the seeker of Gnosis. In the previous chapter we discussed the basic framework of the great chain of being, its 5 characteristics, and gave some examples of this model in esoteric systems. In this chapter we want to put flesh on the bones and outline a specific model of the great chain of being based on a Gnostic theosophic system. This model owes a lot to the early Greek mystery traditions, the source of Gnosticism, as well as to later Gnostic and theosophic traditions. CH-HAPT TER RTH our RE Phi IRRSSTTPR RE and NCC PLSS. Who or what is God? One of the central issues within any religious tradition is who or what is God. In traditional faiths as well as within esotericism and mysticism there is clear definition of God, though this may be expressed through many diverse images and language forms. These definitions, while divergent in form, have one thing in common: they all define God without the using descriptions in moral or ethical terms. God simply is. In some sense this is central to the Gnostic understanding of God, for he, she, it is beyond definition. To define God in any way is in some sense to limit he, she, it. For the Saivite Hindu, for example, the supreme deity is defined as Shiva, with Brahma and Vishnu simply being modes or personas. While in other traditions Brahman or Vishnu is supreme, with the other deities being modes of its expression. In each case, there is still a further more transcendent form, the Parabrahm or Paravishnu, Shiva, each being defined as beyond definition, with the traditions of divine activities being relegated to the lesser forms or manifestations or interpreted in an allegorical fashion. In the Zoroastrian faith, titles such as Ahura Mazda are superlative definitions of a first cause, while in the later derivative Mithric faith God was defined as Zurvan or the Lord of Time, since fate or time was believed to be the principle which is beyond all things. For the Gnostic, God simply is. He, she, it is the one source beyond and behind all things. In both the Zoroastrian and Israelite faiths, God is usually simply called Lord, as this designates a title of respect for a superior. While these definitions are all, in some sense, useful, mystics and Gnostics usually go a step further. They define God by what it is not. This use of negative imagery allows the very first principle to be beyond all form, definition and human projections. In many traditions as is achieved by the use of a paradox, so we have descriptions such as the unmoved mover, unoriginate originator, and so forth. In Zen Buddhism we have the description of the Tao as the Tao that can be spoken as not the Tao. In Gnostic literature we also have some very poetic representations of this first source. The Gnostic concept of God is more subtle than that of most exoteric religions. It reconciles the supposed differences between so-called monotheistic and polytheistic traditions, as well as uniting such models as theism, deism, and pantheism. The Gnostic Handbook, page 25. What's in a name? The issue of the name of God is an important one, for in some sense to give something a name is to define it. For medieval sorcerers, to know the name of a spirit was to control it. In the Gnostic tradition, we understand the frailty of the human spirit and the desire to project humanity onto divinity. This tendency towards anthropomorphism is a dangerous one. Too often man in his suffering desires to bring the gods down to a more physical level. When this happens, the currency of divine imagery is debased. While certainly images, legends, myths, and god names have their place, their value is in what they represent rather than in themselves. In regards to the names of God in the Old Testament, there is a real quandary. There are many names for God, though translated under the one title in English. What makes it more difficult is that each name has a different meaning. The name Elohim, for example, means mighty ones, noted as plural, and can be applied to any form of demigod, destructive or constructive, of the light or of darkness. The same applies to the formula of YHVH. While it has esoteric meaning, it too has been twisted to reflect the barbaric and violent storm god that is falsely represented throughout the Old Testament as the creator. For Gnostics, there are literally two gods within the Old Testament period, the original I Am, the transcendent one of the light, and the barbaric thought form which became the nationalistic warlord of later fundamentalist Judaism. For these reasons, Gnostics tend to avoid the Old Testament names of God altogether and use the more common terms of the mystery tradition. The pleroma. The first principle is the source of all light, the unoriginate originator. However, this principle does not exist alone. Throughout time, he, she, it expands and contracts, filling the spiritual dimensions with luminous beings of all orders and forms. In the Valentinine hierarchy, for example, there are 8 major forms, eons, and 22 minor. In the Gnostic Theosophic tradition, there are 3 principles and 7 lower planes or dimensions. The processes by which these realities are created are complex and vary from tradition to tradition. Each of these interpretations can be further expanded to include a whole universe of luminous realities, from the highest forces or eons to choirs and angels. Traditionally, this complete spiritual kingdom is known as the pleroma or fullness because it is filled to the brim with light and life. At the same time, the major spiritual forces within it are known as eons. While in the Gnostic tradition we tend to emphasize the 3 principles, the divine will, logos and Sophia, and the 7 spirits or eons, there is a universe of created beings which exist in the pleroma and which fulfill the creative directive expressed by the Lord of Wisdom. In one Gnostic tradition, Michael, as a manifestation of the Logos Ray, and first. The Gnostic Handbook, page 26. A state predecessor of Jesus, who was the first created immortal. The divine will. The divine will is the first principle of action. It is Kether in the Kabbalah and Brahma in the Hindu traditions. It is the creative principle, not in the sense of matter but in beginning the emanation process through which the whole great chain of being with its world, dimensions and multitudes of life are manifested. Logos and Sophia. The 2 principles which are manifested and work in unison with the divine will are the Logos and Sophia. The Logos is the divine mind, and the concept came directly from the Greek mystery traditions. Indeed, as early as 6th century BCE, Heraclitus stated that the Logos was shared by all. While Orpheus stated, "Behold the Logos divine, thread well the narrow path of life and gaze of him." It is from this tradition that the Gospel of St. John derives its model as expressed in the early verse, "In the beginning was the Logos." The Logos was known as Spenta Mainu in the Zoroastrian tradition. In mythology, it is sometimes the pre-existed state of the Son of God. There are many positions in the great chain of being for the Logos and Sophia, and as we study further, complex myths and legends of their power will be discussed. However, in their most primal form, they work within the triangle of force in the upper world. What about Jesus? One of the major debates in Christianity has been about the nature of Jesus. However, when we examine the New Testament in a critical manner, some important facts come to light. Jesus over and over again claimed to be the Messiah and a Son of God, but not God himself. He prayed to the Father and spoke of God as a separate entity to whom he was obedient. In the Gospel of John, the identity of Jesus is the central theme. The aim of this Gospel is to show the reader that Jesus is a Messiah, the Son of God, not God the Son. John 21:31. While John himself clearly tells us that Jesus distinguished himself from the Father, who is the only one God, John 17:3, 5:44, 6:27. We also find St. Paul clearly describing Jesus as the firstborn of every creature and the firstborn of the dead, Col 1:13, 15, 18. This is echoed in the book of Revelation, where we read that Jesus is the beginning of the creation of God. Over and over again we find nothing of Jesus being God or even equal with God. Jesus hence was a messenger of the pleroma whose God existed in the upper worlds. The Gnostic Handbook, page 27. That which is not. Divine will. Sophia, the Logos. The polarity of Logos and Sophia. The Gnostic Handbook, page 28. Jesus, Christ and Logos. When we come to understand that Jesus was a created being, a new picture of divinity arises. In many Gnostic traditions, many sons of God are acknowledged. However, Jesus was believed to be the first created entity, Michael. Jesus existed in the first estate before coming into a physical body, as Michael, that immortal who plays such an important role in mystical Christian traditions. When Michael is born into the Essene community, he becomes Jesus. At his baptism, after years of training, the so-called lost years, he became the Christ. His special Essene training had involved processes that cleansed the human state by the power of Sophia and transformed his bodily vehicle into a form that was made pure enough for the communion with the Logos. Jesus is an individual, discrete being. Michael still existed but communed with the Logos within him. Jesus was not and is not God or the Logos or Christ, he became Christed, and hence in that understanding is known as Jesus the Christ. The term Christ means anointed and refers to the state of sonship to the Lord of wisdom. Jesus at his baptism communed with the mind of God, Logos. His actions came to embody the Spirit of God, Sophia, and he became a full Son of God, Christ. We speak of God, of the Son, his Word, and of the Holy Spirit, and we say that the Father, the Son, and the Spirit are united in power. For the Son is the intelligence, reason, and wisdom of the Father, and the Spirit as an effluence, as light from fire. In the same way, we recognize that there are other powers which surround matter and pervade it. Athenagoras. Generally speaking, the ancient Gnostics primarily viewed Christ as an eternal, celestial power, the Logos with which it is possible to have an intimate, personal relation, since our higher consciousness is made in its image. For this reason, Gnostics stressed the experience union with the divine and showed little interest in the historical Jesus, whom it has always been impossible to know in a concrete sense or even accurately in a historical sense. Jesus Christ, Son of God. David Fiddler. Quest Books. 1993. The state of Christhood is a state to which all of us must aim. It is the state by which we return to the pleroma. The Logos and Sophia are energy fields emanating into the lower worlds, and if permitted will transform us into immortal beings. This teaching is the solar tradition and is central to our understanding of the Gnosis. The Gnostic Handbook, page 29. That which is not divine will. Sophia the Logos. Awakened by the mind of God, Logos purified by the wisdom of God, Sophia. Empowered by divine will. The Christ state. The Gnostic Handbook, page 30. What is Sophia? The general understanding of the Holy Spirit is found in the Christian tradition as a desexing of the great feminine power. Sophia is the goddess or feminine principle, and as such exists from the earliest pagan traditions right through to the Greek mysteries and Gnosticism. In Gnostic literature, she is described by many names: the All-Mothers, Mother of the Living, Shining Mother, and the Holy Spirit. Sophia is seen as the counterpart of the Logos and cannot work without. It is hence suggested in esoteric Gnostic literature that it was the combined power of Jesus and Mary Magdalene who transmitted the mysteries, not Jesus alone. The Sophia tradition has survived hidden under the veil of Christian piety. It is still found in the cult of the Virgin Mary and is most powerful in the Russian Orthodox traditions. It is a tradition of great age and some beauty that personifies the power of the Holy Spirit as distinctly female. For example, in Proverbs particularly, we have Sophia wandering the street begging men to love her. While in the following quotes we may even begin to think that Sophia or wisdom is separate, yet in reality, Sophia is a facet of the Lord of wisdom himself. Wisdom crieth without, she uttereth her voice in the streets, she crieth in the chief place of concourse, in the openings of the gates, in the city she uttereth her words, saying, How long, ye simple ones, will ye love simplicity? And the scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. Turn you at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit unto you, I will make known my words unto you. Because I have called, and ye refused, I have stretched out my hand, and no man regarded, but ye have set at naught all my counsel, and would none of my reproof. When your fear cometh as desolation, and your destruction cometh as a whirlwind, when distress and anguish cometh upon you. Then shall they call upon me, but I will not answer, they shall seek me early, but they shall not find me, for that they hated knowledge, and did not choose the fear of the Lord, they would none of my counsel, they despised all my reproof. Therefore shall they eat of the fruit of their own way, and be filled with their own devices. For the turning away of the simple shall slay them, and the prosperity of fools shall destroy them. But whoso hearkeneth unto me shall dwell safely, and shall be quiet from fear of evil. The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way, before his works of old. When he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he set a compass upon the face of the depth, when he established the clouds above, when he strengthened the fountains of the deep, when he gave to the sea his decree, that the waters should not pass his commandment, when he appointed the The Gnostic Handbook, page 31. Foundations of the earth, then I was by him, as one brought up with him, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him. Proverbs 1:20-33, 8:22, 27-30. This great being, both royal and feminine, who being neither God nor the eternal Son of God, neither angel nor saint, receives the veneration of the one who accomplishes the Old Testament, as well of the one who is the begetter of the New Testament, who is she, then, but the truest humanity, the purest and most whole of beings, the macrocosmic whole, the living soul of nature and of the universe, eternally united and uniting in the process of time with the divine and uniting all that is. The pillar and foundation of the truth, Pavel Florensky. The importance of Sophia can be best understood when we understand the primal myth behind her nature. Throughout many cultures there has been the legend of the goddess who is stolen from the world of life and is taken to the underworld. There she is kept captive, pining for her lover who is still in the other world. She waits and pines until at last some salvation is achieved by her hero coming into the underworld to save her. However, this salvation is at a cost, and together they end in a battle against the underworld until the completion of the tale. Though there are many modifications of this tale, it is the story of the spark of God within man. Man's true self is caught in the coils of earth and is lost in the consciousness of matter. The nature of the spirit spark within man is that of being a seed, God in potential. In Hebrew it is called the Ruach, and interestingly, one definition offered of the Ruach is Sophia. So, here we have an Israelite version of the classic tale. The Spirit of God in man is a spark, a seed of light. It is caught in matter and crying out for salvation. The Logos embodied in Jesus answers the call and through great suffering offers salvation. But it is not that simple, for while Sophia still lives in the world system, she can only travel to the upper world by day and must return to the underworld by night, or so the legend goes. So man, on the path of transfiguration, though being reborn through the powers of the pleroma, must live in the world, but try not to be of it. Sophia hence offers us some fascinating insights into the nature of God. She is the daughter of the divine will and yet is the part of the divine will itself. She is the spouse and lover of the Logos and the Spirit within man. She is reflected in the light hidden in nature, the ecclesia, the Gnostic scripture and man, and illustrates the presence of light in all things. In each of these things Sophia is manifested. In the material world Sophia is the presence of God in nature. Even after all the pain man has inflicted on it, nature still exhibits the divine spark, though its luster has been sorely diminished. Sophia is the bride of the Logos embodied in the Gnostic Handbook, page 32. Ecclesia, in the scriptures Sophia is wisdom, and in man she is the very essence which changes him from mortal to immortal. She is the Holy Spirit. Therefore Sophia is twofold, at once divine and creaturely, above and before creation and in creation. In the world, Sophia is actualized as the earth's arrows for heaven, all creation longing for liberation from the bondage of corruption, for the radiance of sophonic light, for beauty and transfiguration. Sophia, the wisdom of God. Sergei Bulgakov. Lindisfarne Press, 1993. The concept of Sophia is alien to many Western Gnostics, and yet when we clearly study the Bible in the light of the Gnosis, we find she is an integral part of divinity. When we consider how often the concept of Sophia is linked to the concept of wisdom, we can achieve a deeper understanding of the power and beauty of the pleroma. The polarity of the god and the goddess. While the three principles, sometimes called the triangle or triune principle, singular, work in unison, in many traditions there is a strong emphasis placed on the polarity between the Logos and Sophia. While many Gnostics would tend to avoid overt anthropomorphism and see these more as principles, other traditions place a strong emphasis on the god-goddess nature of the polarity. These traditions range from those of paganism and heathenism to the Syzygies of Valentinus. While there is nothing wrong with using myth and legend to put flesh on the bones of metaphysical principles, we should not confuse the image with the essence. Certainly there is a wide range of god and goddess images which fit nicely on this polarity. They also move down through the planes and have other expressions. If we use the Kabbalistic model for a moment, we can see how the pagan concept of the horned god and the triple goddess arose. The horned god manifests as the Logos in Chakma and then as the sun. These are his two modes. While the goddess manifests as the old crone of Saturn, Sophia, Binah, the midwife, lunar, and the girl child, earth. These images are pregnant with meaning and certainly help us appreciate the power of these principles beyond simple mental speculation. However, care must be taken, for it is too easy to reduce the gods to images which fit our preconceptions, and by using a gender-based polarity we can easily end up with both misogynist and homophobic models. The Gnostic Handbook, page 33. That which is not divine will. Daughter, mother. Crone. 3 phases of the goddess: Sophia, Earth, Moon, and Saturn. Daughter, mother, and crone. 2 horns of the Great God, Logos, Neptune, Chakma, and the Sun. The Gnostic Handbook, page 34. This ability to show the origins of the symbols of many systems is a unique characteristic of Gnosticism. Rather than there being conflicts between pagan and so-called Christian, theism and non-theism, and related contradictions, we find that all alternatives are reconciled within an all-encompassing system. This is the insight which Gnosticism gives. It shows the esoteric meaning behind religious symbol systems and in some sense bypasses them by divining their true meaning. This does not degrade the role of myth, legend, tales, and scriptures, but places them in the real position, that is, as the outer flesh or form of the mysteries. Scriptures cannot stand alone. Within the Gnosis at their heart, they become as stone. Impersonal to personal. As part of the Gnostic worldview is the understanding of the role of personalism in religion. By personalism we mean not only theism, the worship of a personal god, but the use of gods and goddess with personality, character, and humanness. This tendency is found in all religious traditions. While in the pagan traditions the gods seem more human, it is certainly also found in the monotheistic traditions as well. Jehovah and Allah at times seem all too human. For the Gnostic, the impersonal is the highest principle. The unoriginate originator is without personality in a human sense of the word, since it is beyond all of our preconceptions and projections. While the 3 principles of the divine will, Sophia and the Logos, can be given iconographic and literary form, they too are essentially what they are called, principles. They are not personalities, they are not personal deities. Accordingly, Gnosis is a form of perception, fed by the minds and fueled by the emotions. It does not, however, greatly emphasize devotion, bhakti, that is focused or obsessed with image, sound, form, and so forth. While we understand and use the power of images, to become devoted to one such image is to ignore its true nature. Indeed, obsession with an image of the divine can lead away rather than to the higher principles. There are myriad spiritual forms throughout the great chain of being. In the Gnostic system, there are many, many names for them. As they are in the dimensions below the upper world, they are partial representations of aspects of the divine, and each has its own unique essence, form, and so forth. While these 2, at heart, are principles, there are more and more degrees of independence and uniqueness as we move down the emanation ladder. So, for example, by the time we reach the astral worlds, there are millions of spirits of varying characters and forms, each unique. None are absolutely good and evil, but there are variations in their attitude towards man. While these spirits have their own unique essence and expression, the form they manifest in is due to us, not to them. They are clothed by the language and mythology of our cultures, heritage, and traditions. We should always keep this in mind when dealing with different symbol systems. It is not the letter that is the most relevant, but the spirit. It is too easy to confuse the images of the divine as found in literature and myth with the reality and become locked in forms which only partially represent the unique characteristics of a spirit, god, or form. In some sense, we must transcend the gods to understand them. The Gnostic Handbook, page 35. The solar logos, Christ. The term Christ means anointed, and it is the force of the spiritual sun. It represents the completed individual in which Sophia and the Logos have transformed consciousness and the mediator at the nexus of all systems. The solar Logos, Christ, or the sacred sun, transmits the transforming energies of the triune principle throughout the planes. It is the door through which the energies of the upper world communicate with those of the planes. It can be imaged as the dying and reborn sun, and hence related a wide range of God-man myths and legends. I am the door, by me if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out, and find pasture. John 10:9. The sun can be also, however, harsh. It dries out the land and kills the livestock, as well as bringing out the change of tides and the flourishing of life. This reminds us that creation and destruction are the normal cycles of the universe, and we must grow through them, not being too attached to the material experience. Since the triune principles do not directly manifest in the lower worlds, the solar sphere becomes the intermediary, the manifestation, and the gateway. In some sense, this is where the legend of the incarnation or avatar originated. The belief that God came into the lower worlds is an adaptation or analogy to the process whereby the pleroma manifests via the solar sphere into the lower planes. For the Gnostic, Jesus, for example, was Michael, a created being who incarnated and became Christed. He was not God made flesh. There are many other entities who, being old souls, achieve Christhood and become sons. In this sense, these entities become manifestations of the Son, and hence we can appreciate how the incarnation motif became accepted. However, the anthropomorphic tradition of God actually entering matter as God is a corruption of the solar mythos and a misunderstanding of the essential gnosis. Gods and spirits. The great chain of being is brimming with life. There are spirits, gods, eons, so many forms with so many names. It is simply best to say that as the emanations proceeded from the higher principles through the seven spirits, see below, myriad forms of life are created. In our Gnostic tradition, these are generally categorized as the seven spirits or logoi, sometimes also known as eons. The immortals are masters who work within each plane or ray and spirits. These spirits are of many forms, from the higher to the lower. There are many ways of categorizing them, from the Kabbalistic to the medieval, from Neoplatonic hierarchies to those of Christian angelology. While we are offering one model, it is up to the individual student to explore and expand their understanding through considering the many descriptions of these forms. The Gnostic Handbook, page 36. The Seven Spirits. According to the Gnostic traditions, the triune principle manifests through a series of seven legii, or in more traditional language, archangels or spirits. These forms can be expressed in many different ways. The most traditional is to know them as eons, while in Egypt they would have been called sacred principles or netters. In the Zoroastrian tradition, they are known as the Holy Spirits, Spenta Mesha. These are akin to the seven spirits before the throne in the Book of Revelation. This links interestingly with some Western traditions, which see the seven spirits before the throne, Revelation 4:5, as seven phases of the Holy Ghost. These eons or spirits have many different aspects and facets. They may also be related to the seven rays of the Theosophical and Rosicrucian mystery traditions. In the heavenly hierarchy, these spirits are again emanations from the truant principle, and under them are formed the immortals, beings that embody each ray or spirit. And out of the throne proceeded lightning and thundering and voices, and there were seven lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the seven spirits of God. Revelation 4:5. The seven spirits according to the Zoroastrian tradition. 1. Kshetra Varya, desirable power, the kingdom of God. 2. Harvatat, wholeness, health. 3. Spenta Armati, holy piety, devotion. 4. Amaritat, long life, immortality. 5. Bohumana, good purpose, good thought. 6. Ashabahishta, best, right, truth, order. 7. Spenta Minu, the Holy One. Further to this, the seven legii form the body of the universe or great chain of being. It is from their forms that the seven planes of existence come into being. This is one of the most important aspects of the Gnostic teachings. The seven planes are not simply geographic locations, they are living, growing, transforming bodies which are enlivened by the seven legii. It is the same with the physical plane. It is not inert matter but is alive. The earth is not simply a ball of dirt in space, but is Gaia, immense organism which is as much alive as we are. Each plane subdivides into lesser planes, and each plane dimension has its own consciousness and reality. In this model, everything is interrelated. So, for example, man is in a unique symbiotic relationship with Gaia, which in turn is part of a greater web of spiritual energy which makes up the legii of the physical plane. All forces are in symbiotic relationship with those above them. The Gnostic Handbook, page 37. That which is not. Divine will. The Logos Sophia. The seven Logoi. The seven planes, dimensions are worlds, each a living web empowered by one of the seven legii. The Gnostic Handbook, page 38. Hence, man is part of the body of Gaia, and his behavior and actions affects Gaia as much as would our own semi-independent digestive function. This unique and new view of life is imperative for not only environmental and conservation reasons but for our own survival as a species. This may seem at odds to the traditional dualism of much Gnosticism. However, we will explain in some detail later what Gnostic dualism really is, and bluntly, it isn't what most people think. The various realms that exist can be understood as planes, dimensions, realities, locales, or worlds, depending on what perspective you may wish to take. The Gnostic tradition tends to use the Gnostic Theosophic model, which offers seven planes. There are other models such as the four worlds of the Kabbalah and the more complex Valentinian scheme of some theorians. We are not stating one is more correct than the other, we have simply chosen one model from within our tradition to expound. Together, all models illustrate the multifaceted nature of reality, the Earth being only one plane within a larger picture. There can be many views of such a structure, ranging from alternative universes, dimensions, or planes to other realities, each has its place in our understanding. The seven planes. Max Heindel Model. Theosophical Model. Divine Plane. Divine Plane. Plane of Virgin Spirits. Monadic Plane. Plane of Divine Spirit. Spiritual Plane. Plane of Life. Spirit. Intuitional Plane. Plane of Thought. Mental Plane. Desire Plane. Astral Plane. Physical Plane. Physical Plane. The Divine Plane. This is the point of origin, the matrix from which all universal systems evolve. It is the plane of the triune principle and on a more tangible level, the dimension from which the upper world operates. The monadic plane. From this plane the true self or the pneumatic light self operates in the present cycles, though in most of humanity it is in embryonic form only. In the cycles of creation this is the plane from which polarization and differentiation originated. It is on this level that the seven Holy Spirits operate and direct creation. The Gnostic Handbook, page 39. The spiritual plane. This is the plane of archetypal forms and is the location from which energies from the upper planes are condensed and radiated into the lower. This is the plane on which the immortals exist. The intuitional plane. This plane is also known as the intuitional plane. It is the dimension where the forces and archetypes take creative solidity and manifest. On a human level, it is the dimension of high-level intuition and cosmic awareness. The mental plane. This is also known as the mental plane. Here the flood of energy takes the form of reason and thought. Blueprints are formulated and laid. The astral plane. The desire plane is also known as the emotional or astral plane. In some traditions it is also seen as the reflective sphere or astral light. The division between the mental and desire plane is not as clear as it seems and intermingling occurs between them both. The physical plane. The world on which we live. The earth and the underworld. On a critical examine of our models one will notice an anomaly. In the organic models, Yggdrasil etc., the underworld is beneath the earth. Indeed in medieval mysticism hell, the Christian underworld, is even within the earth being at its center. While in the emanation model the underworld is called the astral plane, even the spirit world, and is above the earth, ruled by the moon. The first thing to note is that the underworld is not hell. There is no heaven and hell in the Gnostic system. The underworld is the realm of the dead and where we experience the afterlife. Some people create their own heavens and hells there, but that is another story. The models we are outlining cannot be reduced to scientific charts. While there are seven planes, they intermingle and meld. The planes exist behind, through, and within the physical, and they interpenetrate each other just as much. The astral plane can be imaged under, inside, or above the earth. The Gnostic Handbook, page 40. All have the same imagery. It is somewhat a matter of how we conceptualize the universe. The model of the astral plane above the earth, ruled by the moon, has a more hierarchy feel, while the underworld communicates more on an emotional level. The model of the underworld also brings to mind the ancient polarity of earth and sky. The earth and sky polarity was probably the most ancient model of the universe, while the Logos and Sophia model is central to Gnosticism. This older structure is found in many nature religions. The divine will is seen as either the cosmic father or mother and the earth as the wife, husband, or lover. In this mythology, the underworld is intricately connected to the earth, even seen as part of it. In the Norse tradition, the god is Odin or Tyr, much earlier, and he is the lord of the upper world, Asgard, and Hel is the goddess of the underworld and earth. Hel and Freya are much the same goddess, she simply split into two and was demoted due to strong patriarchal and later Christian influences. She was the goddess of death and rebirth, fertility and suffering. She guards the dead and sends them back to life. She complements and completes the lord or Tyr, Odin. In Celtic mythology, she guards the great cauldron, and in the Norse this cauldron is the seething cauldron, from which the drizzle formed from fire and ice coalesces and from which life is formulated. We can see a crossover with Sophia, she too is the goddess of the departed and the earth. This system also embraces the Logos and Sophia model but expresses it in a different way. The danger with overtly nature-oriented symbolism is that it genderizes the principles, and while this offers some beautiful literature and mythology, it can also transform the gods so that they appear in our own image, which degenerates the principles into warring, fighting and marauding reflections of ourselves. And this is certainly true with the Viking tradition. So once again we can marvel at the imagery, but should be aware of its limitations. The Immortals. The immortals are those beings which work within the force of the 7 planes or rays. The 7 logoi emanate currents of force throughout the planes called rays, and through each there is a spiritual hierarchy. In this work we will not discuss these in details, but you can read about them in our other texts. While some traditions have brought the master tradition into disrepute with their ever-channeling ascended yahoos etc., this should not be allowed to discredit the real and important role of those who work within the great hierarchy. CH-HIAPT TERR FOO URR THE SECCR RET of FSA 2 or RNN. The complexity of evil. The major problem with understanding evil is that there are many forms of evil and these are mixed together. It is especially difficult when cosmological evil is mixed with issues of ethics and personal suffering. While the iconography of evil certainly appears in all cultures, one of the most potent icons is that of Satan. It is a difficult image because most people do not appreciate the various motifs which have been woven together to make the one figure. It is quite clear from Old and New Testament sources, as well as apocryphal texts, that Satan meant something very different at various times. These differences have been overlooked within contemporary Christianity due to its desire to frighten the sinner into salvation. For the esotericist, it is imperative to decode these perennial motifs, or they solve once and for all the mystery of evil. The image of Satan has 3 primary motifs within it. These can be found in the Old Testament, apocryphal sources with some OT/NT references, and within the New Testament. These are mirrored in other esoteric traditions. For example, the Old Testament view of Satan as tester is also found in Hinduism. These 3 motifs can be summarized as follows. 1. The Satan-Saturn complex, the illusion of cosmological evil. Perceptional dualism. 2. The Watchers, evil is ignorance. Fallen astral forms. Temporary dualism. 3. Evil is ignorance, ethical dualism. These 3 models are found quite clearly in different forms of scripture. The Satan as tester image is primarily Old Testament. The Watchers are found primarily in the Book of Enoch, but also referenced subtlety in the OT and NT. The image of Satan as bad mind is primarily New Testament. These 3 motifs are found in all aspects of Gnostic, as seen in Christian literature. For example, the Demiurge. The Demiurge is Saturn is not evil but only the harsh school teacher, yet within the Watchers the Demiurge is desire, pride, uncontrolled lust etc. All fallen spirits are demiurges, all have desire to leave their station and enter Earth. While the demiurge in man is the ego. These 3 different motifs explain the strange amalgam of tales we have throughout the Bible about evil, which range from the fall of Lucifer, light bearer, the Watchers, Jesus calling Peter, Satan, ethical dualism, and the Book of Job image of Satan as tester. The Gnostic Handbook, page 42. The secret of Saturn. The darkest aspect of the Gnostic tradition is that of dualism. So many people who read about the Gnosis accept at face value that the demiurge, or creator, is evil and that matter itself is, if not evil, then a mixture of darkness and light. This antimatter, antibody position tends to be found in extreme Christian Gnostic sects and has continued today through Christian Puritanism and some New Age Gnostic derivatives, Heaven's Gate UFO cult as a prime example. To understand the nature of the demiurge and hence the true Gnostic position on the world and matter, we need to provide a background on some of the myths involved. There are many traditions and explanations of how this occurred, ranging from the fall of Sophia to the Genesis tale. For the Valentinians, the primal error occurred after a long process of hierarchical expansion. The unoriginate originator expanded into manifestation, and hierarchies on hierarchies took form. Each hierarchy manifested a further hierarchy until, finally, the last emanation, Sophia, was created. Sophia, being the last creation, did not understand the nature of what had occurred. In her anguish she cried out for the divine will. In this state of suffering she emanated Ildebaoth. Ildebaoth in his ignorance believed he was the creator and formed matter. By his error, Sophia herself became trapped in his creation, as did thousands of beings of light that came to believe his error. This tradition is intriguing as it paints the demiurge in an ignorant rather than malefic role. In some sense it embodies the ambivalence found in much Hermetic literature, where the false creator is seen more as a blundering demigod than as adversary. For the Kabbalists, the fall occurred on a far more ethereal level. When the cosmic light of Ein Sof began to expand, it produced emanations known as Sephiroth, or light centers. As these Sephiroth, or light vessels, began to create a hierarchy of being, a reflection was cast onto the ocean of cosmic spirit, and this reflection, being distorted, gave birth to destructive and twisted forces, Qliphoth, which in turn created the material world. Even among the Gnostics, there are many variations in interpretations of the fall. Some traditions see the creator as the divine will, or Sophia, others see the creator as the demiurge and hence evil. Some have two Yahwehs, a true light lord and a false substitute. Some sects refute the whole Old Testament, saying it as the work of the false Yahweh, while others even see the serpent in Genesis as a premonition of the Savior. For a more modern twist, one science fiction writer, with a penchant for occultism and a strange adaptation of psychology, outlined the Gnostic myth in a more technological form. Millions of years ago, in the spiritual dimensions, a spirit entity decided he wanted more power than was his due. He created a sequence of mind traps, or games. These games or traps enthralled the other spirit beings, and as they became involved in them, they found themselves creating material reality. The final game involved forgetting who they were and entering into matter, hence, they entrapped themselves. Modern adaptations of the Alpha event are not unusual. For example, the Gnostic Handbook, page 43. There is much discussion about the possibility that extraterrestrial entities genetically engineered mankind. These theories were made popular by such writers as Zecharia Sitchin, and on a more vulgar level by Erich von Daniken. Whether we wish to use a highly spiritual and ethereal description such as that by the Kabbalists, or see the supposed fall of man in more material terms, it is of little importance. Something occurred, and the algebra we use to represent it is somewhat irrelevant. The Church teaches that God is the source of all perfect, and that the whole world, visible and invisible, is His creation. Yet one does not need to be a philosopher to observe that in this world of ours, moral and physical evil, suffering, cruelty, decay, death is abundantly present. How then can God, the supreme good, be the cause of suffering and evil? Must He be held responsible for wars, epidemics, the oppression of the poor by the rich? The Bogomils, a medieval Gnostic sect, had an answer which was at least logical and consistent. Evil and pain are inherent in this world because the world is the creation of the evil one. The Byzantine Commonwealth, Obolensky. What are we to make of such speculations? Is the world really evil? Or worse, is the creator of the world evil? The first thing we need to do is to consider how this model arose, and then examine the esotericism that exists behind it. The first thing we need to consider is how the different models of the creation of matter developed. Some traditions, such as the Hindu and Greek, tend not to demonize matter. While such schools admit there are degrees of darkness and light and forces which are helpful to man and those who may wish to hinder, none are actually seen as absolutely evil. Certainly in the pagan traditions, the gods have many aspects, and the appearance of totally evil gods seems to have been the result of Christian influence. Indeed, even the post-primitive of cultures, while placating so-called destructive spirits, see these as protecting the land or a sacred site, etc., there is little evidence of so-called ontological evil. While some schools are dualistic and see a conflict between matter and spirit, this is more a conflict between man's attachment to matter and spirit, hence the emphasis is moved from cosmology to perception. If we examine the multitude of myths regarding the creation of matter with this in mind, we begin to see an answer to our dilemma. These models are talking about different things. Some are talking about cosmology, others about personal evil. So in the Hindu, Greek, and other systems, the question is more the nature of ignorance and evil from the perception of man, while the Gnostic and Kabbalistic seem to be discussing how suffering, etc., arose and tracing this back to a cosmological structure. The Gnostic Handbook, page 44. Perceptional dualism. This begins to hint that the problem is not with the universe but us, it is our perception of the universe which is the issue. Evil, so to speak, is in the eye of the beholder, and hence extremely dualistic Gnosticism is a product of those who suffer, and this seems quite clearly so. To suggest the world or the creator is evil is really a personal perception, and since Gnosis means personal wisdom, then we can see that the Gnostics were recording their personal insights alone, not offering eternal truth. Each insight may vary not only according to the environment and experience of the author, but to the stage of his or her life and the suffering he or she has or has not experienced. Dualism, therefore, is a matter of perception, not one of cosmology. In the Institute we call it perceptional dualism. The nature of perceptional dualism is much like that of a classroom. Like children in school, we may sometimes hate our teachers and other times love them. Long after schooling has ended, later in life we may look back and suddenly realize how much it helped us, but during the period of harsh discipline we may despise the process and the teachers involved. On a cosmological level, evil cannot exist. If the great chain of being unfolded from a single principle, then everything must have its place and role, and to suggest a separate ontologically evil force destroys this balance. So how does evil exist? This paradox is symbolized in the Gnostic astrological traditions as the planet Saturn. Saturn is both Sophia, wisdom, and Satan, the tester. In the Old Testament, Satan was not a rival to God but worked within God's court to test and trial the faithful. Saturn is hence a dual image, and it is to Saturn that the title demiurge is usually applied. Saturn is also Sophia, and through Ilda both matter is created, and yet we may ask, why was it a sin for Sophia to want to know or understand the divine will? It seems clear that this supposed error was actually the process by which Sophia, and with her mankind, could enter matter and achieve an understanding of the divine will. This model is duplicated in Genesis, where the serpent tempts Eve and Eve is seen to fall, yet in reality Eve begins a necessary journey into the material world, symbolized by putting on coats of skin and being dispelled from the garden. The entry into matter was hence painful but necessary. So while Saturn, Sophia, may have caused the material world and its suffering and pain, it is through realizing that this world is only a classroom that we see through the demiurge, Satan, and find wisdom behind it. In the ancient mysteries, this was represented in strange initiatic rites. In these secret rituals, the neophyte would be led to a goat, donkey, or sometimes a strange statue, Baphomet. These animals were made to look as disgusting and obscene as possible. The neophyte would then be asked to kiss the backside of the creature. If they refused, they would have failed the initiation. If they went ahead and puckered up, they found they were kissing the lips of the priestess. Here clearly is the movement from one mode of Saturn to another, from the demiurge to Sophia. The Knights Templar did something similar, where their large devil-like Baphomet figure actually represent the Sophia, the goddess of wisdom. Indeed, the word Baphomet, when decoded with the Atbash geometric code, gives the name Sophia. If we accept that dualism is perceptional, therefore pain, suffering, and the trials of life are rela. The Gnostic Handbook, page 45. Tiv. Pain and suffering may seem nearly intolerable from the perspective of those locked within it and for those experiencing the harder end of life. However, if we accept that as individuals we have many lives and that incarnation is for the purpose of development, then we may, after some consideration, comprehend the reality that pain and suffering is part of a learning process. However, since our minds are limited by material experience, we do not perceive the full picture and hence treat our material reality as the final arbiter of experience. Pain and suffering are real, but only relatively so. Things will seem different if looked at from the wider perspective of multiple lives and worlds. While we may have disposed of cosmological evil, the question still arises as to how does evil appear in the world. While we may accept that pain and suffering, disease, death, etc. are not evil, except from our own perceptions, how do we explain murder, rape, war, and the more destructive of man's behavior? The last phase is probably the most important, man's behavior. So much that we would like to blame on the demiurge, God, spirits, or anything else is actually the fault of mankind itself. As Robert de Grimston discusses in his superb essay, Humanity is the Devil, the cosmological devil or Saturn is not evil, but simply a tester. It is mankind who has become evil through its ignorance. Ignorance is the problem, for in ignoring our true natures we become enmeshed in matter, which is of itself spiritual neutral, and following our desires become more and more ignorant. While matter is neutral, our lust and desires lead to behaviors that can be best described as evil. These occur because we are seeking in matter something it cannot give. Matter is there to give us an experience which leads us back to spirit. If we attempt to gain wisdom from matter, then we will become more and more frustrated. Like a rabid consumer, we seek more and more goods and yet nothing satisfies the craving. Dualism then is between spirit and ignorance, the upper worlds and our attachment to matter, not between spirit and matter themselves, since ultimately, they are part of each other. The Watchers of Enoch. They thought of themselves that they were beings existing by themselves and without a source, since they do not see anything else existing before them. Therefore they live in disobedience and acts of rebellion, without having humbled themselves before the one because of whom they came into being. They wanted to command one another, outrivaling one another in their vain ambition. They were brought to a lust for power over one another according to the glory of the name of which each is a shadow, each one imagining that it is superior to the others. Nag Hammadi Tri, Track 79, 12-32. The Gnostic Handbook, page 46. While we have shown, at least I hope so, that there is no cosmological evil, that does not mean evil cannot or does not exist. Since every entity has free will, then ignorance can occur on multiple levels of existence. Hence, it is important to realize that some spirits can also work in a way that is not beneficial or even harmful to man. Just because a spirit is not physical does not mean it is more developed or evolved. Astral denizens are much the same as us. Indeed, the human dead are part of the astral kingdom, and hence can share our own ignorance and stupidity as well as our joys and illuminations. While certainly Gnosticism does not accept the reality of beings that are intrinsically evil, we do accept that since man has free will and can make himself evil through ignorance, so astral spirits can do the same. These fallen spirits are described in many Gnostic texts and can certainly gang together and influence man in a destructive way. These spirits are not intrinsically or ontologically evil, but have become evil through ignorance, desire, and so on. This is important as it proves there is no evil God in competition with the source of all life, no hierarchy of destruction, but ignorant spirits and entities. The legends of the Book of Enoch, which permeates so much biblical literature, suggest that since these spirits desired to have physical bodies, they entered the earth's stream and interbreed with man, producing giants and depraved offspring. This is why the Great Flood occurred, not to destroy man but to purify the earth of these mutated forms. This desire, however, continued and brought about not only the corruption of many astral realms but allowed these spirits to incarnate on earth. This last fact is important and has far more significance than we may realize. As we will discuss in another work, it is possible many of these fallen spirits have taken physical form and are now in controlling positions in governments and institutions. If we believe that spiritually destructive forces are working on many different levels, then we cannot ignore the existence of these forces on the physical plane as well as on the spiritual. For centuries there has been a belief in a secret government which manipulates and controls world politics. While conspiracy theories may seem, at first glance, unbelievable, when we consider the current state of world affairs, then it does seem that some sort of nefarious plan has been in operation. In Conspiracy or Degeneracy by Revilo P. Oliver we read the following. A theory that a conspiracy has been working consciously for many centuries is not very plausible unless one attributes to them a religious unity. That is tantamount to regarding them as Satanists engaged in the worship and service of supernatural evil. The directors of the conspiracy must see or otherwise directly perceive manifestations which convince them of the existence and power of Lucifer, Satan. And since subtle conspirators must be very shrewd men, not likely to be deceived by autosuggestion, hypnosis, or drugs, we should have to conclude that they probably are in contact with a force of pure evil. This quote illustrates the real focus of the world conspiracy theory. It is not enough to posit the existence of a secret government behind the scenes, we need to ascertain the nature of the forces which govern this secret government. The Gnostic Handbook, page 47. And clearly these forces are the powers we have described, and those who rule these secret bodies are the dominions and principalities we have discussed. There are more books than we can list that identify the secret government and its links with bodies such as the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, and the United Nations. However, only when we grasp the clear indication that these bodies are operated by alien entities, entities without souls controlled and manipulated by destructive archons, do we really understand the full nature of the world around us. I am not so interested in identifying and describing these individuals as I am in calling your attention that they do exist. John the Baptist, as he preached the coming of the Christ, foretold the end of this race of mechanical men when he said, O generation of vipers, who hath warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Again, referring to the barrenness of this counterfeit creation, he said, Every tree therefore which bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down, and cast into the fire. He prophesied the coming of one who would baptize with the sacred fire, whose fan is in his hand, and he will thoroughly purge his floor and will gather the wheat into his garner, but the chaff he will burn with fire unquenchable. Needless to say, these human automatons are the chaff, and their final end can come through only one process, transmutation. For this is the only approved method whereby the wicked shall be removed from the face of the earth. In the Bible, these soulless beings are referred to throughout as the wicked, for they have seen to it that all more specific descriptions of their race have been removed, lest mankind discover them and rise in righteous indignation against their overlords. And thus the death of John the Baptist and that of Jesus the Christ were brought about by the counterfeit race who for thousands of years have set brother against brother, race against race, and have caused the children of God to blame one another for the murder of the saints. Today, as always, they occupy positions of authority and financial power. They have gained control of the destiny of empires and they seek ever to thwart the purposes of God. The injudicious use of taxation exerted by their direction has placed an unconscionable yoke upon the neck of humanity. Their control of entertainment media and the trends of youth towards dissonant arts forms and discordant music has perverted noble attributes and spawned a race of delinquent rebels whose code, or lack of it, has gnawed at the vital future of America and the people of many nations. Modern means of communication and distribution of the printed word, the spoken word, and the dramatic word through television and motion pictures have caused ideas to span continents and the world almost with the speed of light. Like a prairie fire, the dry grass consumes itself to the roof of the Gnostic Handbook, page 48. Hopes of humanity which are blighted, then by the searing infamy of wasted energy and emotion. The soulless ones, cloning of a counterfeit creation. Mark L. Prophet. Summit University Press, LA. 1981. The doctrine of dominions and principalities is one of the more difficult to explain without sounding extremist and paranoid. It certainly lends itself to dark speculation and conspiracy theories. However, it is a doctrine that is central to a real understanding of the world around us, and there is certainly more to come, since the Watchers not only live among us but through interbreeding are part of our own genetic makeup. In some sense, it is mandatory for our transfiguration to realize the extent to which our bodies, mind, world, and reality are controlled and manipulated by forces hostile to our spiritual goals. Archons, dominions, and thoughts that run wild. There is a simple premise in esoteric literature: thoughts have power. Even modern science accepts that behind the structure we know as the material work is a web of energy, and the interactions between different types of energy creates the semblance of solidity we call matter. Thought, then, as a form of energy, has the same power. This is why in so many traditions there are admonitions about controlling the thought process, while thinking and doing are still different things. Thinking does have its effects. Clairvoyants of many persuasions have seen and documented the shapes and forms produced by various types of thought. Witness the work of Charles Leadbeater. While many of these forms are fleeting, when empowered by the emotions and by reverie and memory, they become more than just thoughts, they become thought forms. These thought forms exist beyond simply when they are thought, they take on an independent existence within the mind of the thinker. They then influence memory and condition our perceptions of everyday life. We may want to see these thought forms as only existing within the psyche of the neurotic or unstable, and yet all of us have our lives conditioned by the thought forms we have created in the past. For most people, they never see the present unfiltered. All experience is sieved through thought forms created from childhood and even beyond through past lives. Meme, prawn. Meme, a contagious idea that replicates like a virus, passed on from mind to mind. Memes function the same way genes and viruses do, propagating through communication networks and face-to-face contact between people. David S. Benham. The Gnostic Handbook, page 49. Thoughts, however, go much further. As documented in much modern research on memes, thought forms can become like viruses of the mind. They can spread throughout groups, families, nations, and indeed the world, and are passed through the deeper levels of the unconscious we all experience. Rumors, tales, urban myths are all memes or thought forms. While they may be primarily passed via the printed word, internet, media, etc., there is a time when they reach a certain saturation point and then become part of the collective unconscious. This is exceptionally dangerous, as negative and violent forms can control groups and crowds, creating mob violence and aggression. These groups' minds are really thought forms out of control. If we return to the image of Satan for a moment, we may remember that the image of Satan in the Old Testament is primarily that of the tester, the devil's advocate, rather than one of an evil being. In the New Testament, however, things are different. The term Satan is used to describe people. Jesus calls Peter Satan and says, "Get behind me." Groups. Jesus says the father of the Jews is the devil, and is described as plural, legion. If we consider this model carefully, we start to realize that the New Testament Satan is not the tester of the Old Testament, but is bad mind. That is, Satan is negative thought forms. These forms exist in an individual, Peter's weakness, or collectively, the idea of ownership and control which tempted Jesus as he looked over the cities. All this can be yours. It is legion, as there are multitudes of archons both dwelling within our minds and within the collective unconscious. The question of the devil being the father of the Jews takes us into the darker reaches of Archon theory, because not only can they exist in the unconscious collective mind, but they can create a breach into the astral worlds through which fallen spiritual entities can then move into the earthly spheres and control the thought forms created. These forms is known in the Gnostic tradition as archons. They are the products of mankind enlivened by fallen spirits and fed by our own emotions. They can control and influence individuals, collectives, even nations and governments. Jesus decried the Jews, not because of racial prejudice but because the Judaic community of that period had become fundamentalist and literalist. They had lost the esoteric core of their tradition. In becoming so extreme, they had created a destructive thought form which they were feeding. In Gnostic literature, these archons can so increase in power that they become dominions, forces which control whole groups of people, even races and countries. So while the Jewish people thought they were worshipped the I Am, they were actually feeding a false god, an archon they had created from their own ignorance. This happens all too often, and why the esoteric tradition is so imperative. Without the guidance of Gnosticism and esotericism, many will be caught within the web of exoteric, outer religion. Fundamentalism, cults, literalism, extremism are all products of incorrect readings of the spiritual tradition. When these groups develop, their thought forms take on a life of their own, and not being connected to the real energies of the great chain of being, they soon sour and become a nexus for the manifestation of fallen entities from the astral worlds. These fallen spirits work out of step with the universe and invigorate these forms so that they become independent, discrete fields of energy within the astral world, archons. They grow from archons to dominions and rule from their astral kingdoms. Their poor and unfortunate worshippers think they are following the true God, but are actually feeding monsters created from Mon's suffering and igno. The Gnostic Handbook, page 50. Rants. Many of these forms feed on suffering, while others feed on pleasure. They amplify the emotions of their members to gain more and more sustenance. In some sense, they are truly spiritual vampires, and without esotericism, all religions and traditions succumb. They took the name of those that are good and gave it to those that are not good, so that through the names they might deceive him, mankind, and bind those to those that are not good. Nag Hammadi Gospel of Philip 54, 18-25. The imagery of archons is very strong in Gnostic literature, and because it has become mixed with tales of cosmological dualism, many have come to believe that the archons are the result of a cosmic error or fall. The reality, as discussed earlier, is that there was no great cosmic error, just a misperception caused by ignorance. Yet at the same time, this ignorance has created a doorway through which fallen forms can enter, and these archons are whatever we call them, which keep us from appreciating our own misperceptions. Indeed, it is through our permission that they enter the Earth's sphere. This is the idea which gave birth to the fall of man tradition. Since man in his ignorance created fallen thought forms and allowed fallen entities to enter into the Earth's stream, then ultimately man is responsible for the present condition of his planet. His is complex, for there is an interaction. These fields prompt entities to interface with our own unconscious. According to the language of the culture they communicate, though, and being a mixture of our own thought forms and fallen spirits can mimic our own hidden desires and needs. In medieval periods we may have has demons, incubus and succubus. In the present we have aliens, UFO abductions, and medical experiments by creatures we cannot see. In the modern mode, these archons are sometimes called ultraterrestrials. However, we must realize that these forms are spiritual in origin. Sure, they may be other races within our universe, assuredly so, but it does seem that the majority of UFO sightings and experience reflect our own fears, terrors, needs, and desires, and hence have archonic origin. The world is the work of lowly powers which, though they may immediately be descended from him, do not know the true God and obstruct the knowledge of him in the cosmos over which they rule. The genesis of these lower powers, the archons, and in general that of all of the orders of being outside God, including the world itself, is the main theme of Gnostic speculation. The universe, the domain of the archons, is like a vast prison whose innermost dungeon is the earth, the scene of Mon's life. Around and above it the cosmic spheres are ranged like concentric enclosing shells. Most frequently there are 7 spheres of the planets surrounding by the 8th that of the fixed stars. The Gnostic Handbook, page 51. The religious significance of this cosmic architecture lies in the idea that everything which intervenes between here and the beyond serves to separate from God, not merely by spatial distance but by active demonic force. Thus the vastness and multiplicity of the cosmic system express the degree to which man is removed from God. The archons collectively rule over the world, and each individually in his sphere is a warder of the cosmic prison. Their tyrannical world rule is called HEMMITT, universal fate. This universal fate aims at the enslavement of man. As guardian of his sphere, each archon bars the passage to the souls then seek to ascend after death, in order to prevent their escape from the world and their return to God. The Gnostic religion, Hans Jonas. So when we read a description of Gnosticism such as that found in the classic text The Gnostic Religion by Hans Jonas, we must appreciate that the seeming cosmic dualism is actually a dualism between the real and the unreal, between the light of the higher worlds and forces which have been created through ignorance. They are like monsters from the ID, they seem real enough, and since the physical world is shaped and formed by our perceptions, they are for all intents and purposes real. The only way for us to escape HEMMITT, universal fate, is to realize that we have created the prison bars ourselves. What a tragic world this is, he reflected. Those down here are prisoners, and the ultimate tragedy is that they don't know it. They think they are free because they never have been free, and do not understand what it means. This is a prison, and few men have guessed. But I know, he said to himself. Because that is why I am here. To burn the walls, to tear down the metal gates, to break each chain. Thou shalt not muzzle the ox as he treadeth out the corn, he thought, remembering the Torah. The Divine Invasion, Philip K. Dick. HarperCollins 1981. For we contend not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against the powers, against the world rulers of this present darkness. Ephesians 6:12. While the archons and the demiurge are creations of man's ignorance, they are used by the Gnostic Handbook, page 52. Fallen spirits as a source of power. This is one of the major problems with the archons we create. They attract forms and spirits which are in ignorance and hence follow them. The battle within. This model becomes more complex when we start to consider its full ramifications. If the Watchers interbred with mankind and produced giants, then this is bizarre enough. However, if their hanged genetic makeup due to their fall has mixed with ours, then mind is a mixture of two life streams. This mixture is found hinted at in all literature. In Norse mythology, we are a mixture of the giants and the breath of Odin. In some schools of Gnosticism, we are a mixture of pre-Adamite and Adamite stock. In others, we are a mixture of the soil of the earth and the divine breath. This biological conflict is important as it explains why we have such different models of experience. There is so much evidence for man's violence and destructiveness, way even beyond that of the animal kingdom, and yet also so much evidence for man's love, beauty, and transcendence. In Gnostic terms, this is because there are two fields of influence, the static pleroma and the dialectic archon. These fields pull us towards the light and towards matter. The drive towards matter is necessary but has been overlaid with the artificial desires and drives of the fallen forms. Hence, the dialectic field is based on an involutionary necessity, but actually works against us. It is important to see what this clash is not. It is not a clash between body and spirit and matter and spirit. Matter has its place and is a necessary teacher. The clash is between spirit, static fields, and the artificial forms created by the Watchers and ultimately by ignorance. Static field. Earth. Dialectic field. The Gnostic Handbook, page 53. In summary, in Gnosticism, evil is many things. It cannot simply be reduced to an easy formula. While there is certainly no ontological or intrinsic evil, there are things which appear evil and things which can become evil. To summarize. 1. There is no cosmological or ontological evil. Saturn is a tester and may seem evil, perceptional dualism, but this is a problem of perspective. While disease and death may seem evil, in the greater picture they are not. There are many partial spirits, such as fire sprites, etc., which can only work in a restricted way and hence can appear evil only because we do not understand their limited focus and purpose. 2. Ethical evil is created through ignorance, which creates attachments to matter, greed, etc., etc. This can infect not only human but spirit beings of varying degrees. Hence there can be angels, demons, etc., which are destructive, but this is of ignorance, not out of cosmological design. 3. Since thoughts have power, man's ignorance has dire effects. It is capable of creating thought vibrations which congregate in the collective unconscious and then, if given enough power, can move into the lower astral plane. These forms, archons and dominions, etc., also collect ignorant astral forms and create principalities within the astral world. These archons then, in turn, influence and control man and his civilization. 4. Man is caught between the fields of energy created by the forces of light pleroma static and the fields forged by the Watchers dialectic, yet created ultimately through ignorance. Ch haya pt terr phi I vive. Thegn no os stticc co on ncceppt of ftime. The Gnostic concept of time. The concept of progress or the lineal development of history is primarily a 19th century invention. While it may have first appeared with the Renaissance and humanist philosophy, it was the industrialization of the West and the advent of Darwinian which really set the ball rolling. Progress as a philosophy has become so deeply ingrained in both the sciences and arts that any modern study within both fields accepts as a foundation a belief in evolutionism, both physical and cultural. The traditional view of history is at variance with this approach. It is inevitably cyclic and emphasizes the ebbs and flows of culture. While the cycle may return to itself, the focus is on decline rather than on development. Within the Norse traditions, the gods are ultimately destroyed at Ragnarok and a new cycle of manifestation, conflict and resolution begins. While within Gnosticism the Omega Day ends the cycle and a new heaven and new earth begins. The Vedic system outlines this cycle in far more detail. The whole of creation is governed by a series of cyclic processes. These range from the days and nights of Brahma, the creative force, to the yugas or epochs. The Sanskrit names for the 4 ages are Krita or Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga and Kali Yuga. The Krita or Satya Yuga is the golden age, the age of spirit, and it is from here that things get successively worse until the Kali age, which ends in an apocalypse of water and fire. Each age in succession is shorter than its predecessor, is more intense, and more material. The Kali age is the shortest, most materialistic, and intensely destructive. It is this age we are in now. The Kali Yuga, or Iron Age, is sometimes described as the age of the wolf, due to its ferocity and violence. There are many different dating systems, but according to the Mahabharata, the Kali Yuga started on the midnight of 17th and 18th February 3102 BCE and represents the final stage of the cycle. It is interesting that this date coincides with the start of the 5th sun period of the Mayans, which they believe climaxes in 2012. All kings occupying the earth in the Kali age will be wanting in tranquility, strong in anger, taking pleasure at all times in lying and dishonesty, inflicting death on women, children, and cows, prone to take the paltry possessions of others, with character that is mostly tamas, rising to power and soon falling. They will be short-lived, ambitious, of little virtue, and greedy. People will follow the customs of others and be adulterated with them. Peculiar, undisciplined barbarians will be vigorously supported by rulers. Because they go on living with perversion, they will be ruined. The Gnostic Handbook, page 55. And Dharma becomes very weak in the Kali age, and people commit sin in mind, speech, and actions. Quarrels, plague, fatal diseases, famines, drought, and calamities appear. Testimonies and proofs have no certainty. There is no criterion left when the Kali age settles down. People become poorer in vigor and luster. They are wicked, full of anger, sinful, false, and avaricious. Bad ambitions, bad education, bad dealings, and bad earnings excite fear. The whole batch becomes greedy and untruthful. Many suitors will become kings, and many heretics will be seen. There will arise various sects, sannyasins wearing clothes colored red. Many profess to have supreme knowledge because thereby they will easily earn their livelihood. In the Kali age, there will be many false religionists. India will become desolate by repeated calamities, short lives, and various diseases. Everyone will be miserable owing to the dominance of vice and tamoguna. People will freely commit abortion. Earth will be valued only for her mineral treasures. Money alone will confer nobility. Power will be the sole definition of virtue. Pleasure will be the only reason for marriage. Lust will be the only reason for womanhood. Falsehood will win out in disputes. Being dry of water will be the only definition of land. Praiseworthiness will be measured by accumulated wealth. Impropriety will be considered good conduct, and only feebleness will be the reason for unemployment. Boldness and arrogance will be equivalent to scholarship. Only those without wealth will show honesty. Just a bath will amount to purification, and charity will be the only virtue. Abduction will be marriage. Simply to be well dressed will signify propriety. And any hard to reach water will be deemed a pilgrimage site. The pretense of greatness will be the proof of it, and powerful men with many severe faults will rule over all the classes on earth. Oppressed by their excessively greedy rulers, people will hide in valleys between mountains. Here they will gather honey, vegetables, roots, fruits, birds, flowers, and so forth. Suffering from cold, wind, heat, and rain, they will put on clothes made of tree bark and leaves. And no one will live as long as 23 years. Thus, in the Kali age, humankind will be utterly destroyed. The Hindu Purana. The 4 ages correlate remarkably well with the image described in the Old Testament book of Daniel. Central to Daniel chapter 2 is the description of an unusual figure, a figure that is used to express a prophetic outline of history. The interesting thing is that inherent with this figure is a pattern and design which is far older than the text of Daniel in which it appears. The image is comprised of gold, silver, bronze, and iron, with clay feet, and partakes of the oldest division of history. While this division also has a localized and prophetic meaning which focuses on the Gnostic Handbook, page 56. Gold, silver, copper, iron. Into matter, back into spirit. The many, the few. Spirit, matter. Flow of mass consciousness degenerates through the spiritualcon. Shiousness develops from yuga to yuga. Kali Yuga, when technology and matter seems at its greatest, it is actually at the lowest ebb, and the few who find wisdom will achieve the most of all. The Yuga cycle. The Gnostic Handbook, page 57. The interplay between various major kingdoms from the 6th century BCE onwards, its primary focus covers immense periods of time and sets the stage onto which humanity plays its part. These 4 ages are also found in the Greek historical tradition as the ages of gold, silver, bronze, and iron. However, what is especially interested in the Greek in a transtemporal age which exists between the Copper and Kali Yuga. While this age, the Age of Heroes, is not seen as existing in time, it exists as the path of transfiguration, the solar tradition, during the Kali Yuga. So while the age may be dark, there is wisdom for those who seek. While the Vedic, Indo-European, Biblical, and Greek traditions may be primarily of a traditional religious nature, the concept of decline is also found within the work of many great historians, so much so that many speak of the school of historical pessimism. In some way, the major figure within this school was Oswald Spengler. Historical models of cyclic time. Oswald Spengler was born in 1880 in Blankenburg, Germany, and educated at the universities of Halle, Munich, and Berlin. On the basis of his extensive studies in mathematics, science, history, philosophy, and art, he formulated a philosophical system that offered an explanation of the history of human culture. In his single important work, The Decline of the West, 1918-1922, revised ed. 1923, Winking Face, Spengler attempted to prove that each civilization possesses a unique soul and style of art and thought, and that all cultures pass through a life cycle of birth, growth, decay, and death comparable to the biological cycle of living organisms. In his analysis of the history of Western Europe, Spengler argued that the culture of Europe had entered the final stage of its existence that was to be chiefly a period of technological and political expansion. His other works include The Crucial Years, 1933, and Man and Technics, 1931. The nexus of Spengler's work is that history is not a mechanical series of events but represents the outward manifestation of a much deeper process. History, according to Spengler, is organic and moves through cycles of summer, spring, autumn, and winter. These cycles are akin to life periods, and there is much in common with Jung's view regarding racial memory, archetypes, and forms. Races and nations have collective minds and hence operate on a deeper level than individuals. They cannot be reduced to economic or class processes alone. These organic cycles of decline are important as they bring the yugas into a more historical and academic vein. Spengler does not describe the great cycles of the ages, as the yugas represent in a macrocosmic aspects, yet his The Gnostic Handbook, page 58. Individual civilizations all work through mini yugas which he represents as organic national seasons. While there will always be debate about the particulars of Spengler's work, its place within the traditional understanding of history cannot be denied. The ramifications of an organic view of civilization are very relevant to the Gnostic. If cultures are like a human body, for example, then we can suggest that its various parts have differing levels of importance, ability, and significance, and that to reduce all aspects of the body, of the organic society to an equal footing would be like suggesting the head is equal to the arm, the appendix to the eyes. This basic inequality is a foundation stone of the unique vision of Gnosticism, which emphasizes individual spiritual development over a vast number of lives. To really appreciate the esoteric and religious significance of these cycles, we need to consider two major figures and their outlines of the sacred cycle, René Guénon and Julius Evola. René Guénon and Julius Evola. Guénon is not a man who liked the press. He was a bitter critic of the cult of personality and avoided worthless shows of ego. While Guénon would have avoided offering any biographical details, I think that at least some background is in order. René Guénon was born on the 15th November 1886 to an architect father. His family owned a vineyard which was passed to his younger brother, as it was obvious René had a flair for the academic but was not gifted in either the arts or winemaking. Moving to Paris in his youth, he had contact with many occult organizations, becoming a student of Papus for a period. By 1912 he had become an initiated Sufi and became deeply immersed in the esoteric of both Hinduism and Islam. After the death of his wife in the 1930s, he left to spend the rest of his life in isolation in Cairo, rejected the modern world. He again married and lived with his Egyptian wife under the name Abdul Wahid Yahi. He died on the 7th January 1951. Guénon's earliest works are meant to clear the way for a real appraisal of esotericism and gnosis. They are bitter and incisive attacks on both theosophy and spiritualism. These two works offer an insightful rejection of the syncretism and bourgeois indulgence that had become the occult movements of the period. He documents the stupidities and extremes of both movements and intimates that it is not the spirits of the dead who are communicating with spiritualists but subversive forces. He believes that these forces of counter-gnosis and anti-tradition were offering counter-initiations in an attempt to degrade the real and essential gnosis. When the assault against counter-gnosis was completed, Guénon turned his gaze to the very soul of Western man. In Orient and Occident, 1924, Crisis of the Modern World, 1927, and the Reign of Quantity and the Sign of the Times, 1953, he lays bare the Western soul and documents the clear signs of our death. The Gnostic Handbook, page 59. Generation and Collapse. These works are uncompromising and offers a critique of the destruction modernism is perpetuating on our society. He demands a return to real esotericism as opposed to the false, feel-good cults of his time. Guénon, however, was not all assault and warfare. His metaphysical works show a great mind which can see to the very heart of esotericism. Certainly his writing on symbolism are hard-going. Titles such as The Symbolism of the Cross, 1931, Fundamental Symbols, 1962, and Multiple States of Being, 1932, are not easy reading. They demand a concentration which, I am afraid, many modern minds fed on computer games and TV will find difficult. However, the sheer intellectual exhilaration one can gain from mastering them cannot be easily forgotten. Guénon also published hundreds of book reviews in such journals as Le Voile d'Isis and Études Traditionnelles, spewing forth venom mixed with insight in such a form that it has never been repeated again. While his critiques of modern forms are noteworthy and relevant, at times there is a tendency to turn a molehill into a mountain and throw the baby out with the bathwater. For example, while Jung's disciples certainly twisted Gnosticism and alchemy totally out of proportion, it is probably unfair to turn the knife on Jung himself. However, in the end we have to realize Guénon was very aware of how the media worked, and hence by providing explosive, venomous and virulent reviews they were guaranteed publication and they were always read, and hence, in that sense, they had their effect. Whether you liked what he said or not, you were affected by what he wrote and considered his message. Guénon's view of history is that it is comprised of a series of cycles. These he takes directly from the Vedic tradition. In practice, this means that history is a record of degeneration. Accordingly, since the earliest times, man has been sinking deeper and deeper into the mire of matter. While view is not popular with materialists and secularists, it is nevertheless the key focus of Guénon's work. In his magnum opus, The Reign of Quantity and the Signs of the Times, Guénon succinctly outlines the process of spiritual degeneration. As man thinks he is evolving, he is simply accelerating his own destruction. Living standards and technology may advance, but only at the cost of spirit. This metaphysical entropy causes matter to become successively more physical, more solid, and on a spiritual level more malefic. Society becomes centered on globalism, witness the New World Order, rather than on nations and individuals, and there is an emphasis on scientific advances rather than simplicity. As we reach the later phases of this degeneration, the present period, anti-traditions and forms of anti-gnosis arise purporting to be of spiritual value. The most dangerous facet of this process is how, in the darkest age, fissures will appear in the barrier between the physical world and the lower astral planes, and there will be an intrusion of the malefic inhabitants of this inferior subtle domain. This strange and dark prophecy as found in is also a key to a deeper understanding of the real nature of Aquarius. While the New Agers claim it will be an age of love and mung beans, since the ruler of Aquarius is Saturn, we can expect a bumpy ride first. While Saturn is also the lord of the Golden Age, the Satya Yuga, this emphasizes the dual nature of the planetary demon, tester, destroyer and guardian of the Gnostic Handbook, page 60. Garden of Eden. The key philosophical emphasis within Gwynon's historical analysis is on the duality of quantity and quality, quality being the character of the Golden Age, and indeed the principle of gold, see our discussions of this later, and quantity, the Kali Yuga attribute. Whether it be the decay of the nature of currency, or the clash between craftsmanship and the rule of the machine, this cycle of decay can be seen within the clash between quantity and quality. Indeed, many modern criticisms of technology such as those of Neil Postman have a strong Guinonian ring. Evola and the revolt against the modern world. Julius Evola was the most notable representative of the traditionalist position. He was also considered one of the most erudite authorities on Hermeticism and magic. This did nothing to reduce the great controversy that surrounds him. Julius Cesare Andrea Evola was born in Rome in 1898 to an aristocratic family of Sicilian origin. His childhood was marked by intelligence close to genius, and he quickly learned many languages. He read widely in German, French, and Italian. He became involved with both the Dada and Futurist movements and was considered a promising artist. He served with honor during World War I in a regiment of mountain artillery and survived the war to continue his search for meaning. He made contact with Arturo Regini, 1878-1946, who was the coordinator of the ER group which studied speculative Freemasonry, occultism, and other occult traditions. It had a strong interest in the work of René Guénon. Evola's natural aristocracy came to the surface, and he became the learning exponent of the developing philosophy of the and its successor KRUR group. Evola and the group became aligned to the natural principles of aristocracy, and while not having a necessarily high opinion of Mussolini, realized the pragmatic value of his revolution and gave him their support in print. Evola's early work, Pagan Imperialism, attacked the debilitating effects of Christianity as it was represented in the period and upheld the heroic virtues of Rome. This work and related articles caused controversy throughout Italy. Later Evola founded La Torre, the Tower, his own magazine. However, due to conflict with the prevailing state, it only lasts 10 issues. His work slowly started to move towards the spiritual side of politics, and he made it clear that the only real return to traditional esoteric values can occur when we ourselves are transformed. In 1945 he was hit by a stray bomb and paralyzed from the waist down. He spent the rest of his life writing, researching, and offering guidance to those seeking a spiritual revolution. He died in 1974. His writing are profuse, yet most are not as yet translated into English. It seems there is a great fear regarding the explosive nature of his insightful vision. Evola was not afraid of offending people's foibles or attacking their sacred cows. He attempted to unite politics, occultism, religion, and traditionalism into a world-shattering vision, and he had remarkable success. The Gnostic Handbook, page 61. For Evola, history was a series of cycles that are degenerative rather than evolutionary. We are then in the darkest age of all, the Kali Yuga, rather than entering an age of light, love, and peace. Our modern way of thinking is, according to Evola, a wasteland. It is the final stage in the decay of truth rather than its pinnacle. History from this perspective is a series of steps downward, whereby new religious and esoteric systems are fragments of the truth rather than being new innovations or developments. Evola's magnum opus, Revolt Against the Modern World, slices through the false theosophies, New Age visions, and pseudo-intellectual systems so prevalent today, and offers insight into the real nature of man, his history, and his goals. The approach of Evola is elitist in the sense that it is intellectually and spiritually demanding. Evola demands maximum concentration from his readers. However, in return he offers a worldview, a Weltanschauung that challenges the foundations of currently held beliefs. The Nexus of Evola's Revolt Against the Modern World is an exposition on the cycles of history and an intense and insightful consideration of the role of esoteric spiritual values. Evola's historical outline takes the Yugas a step further. He discusses the cultural focus of each period and the changes that take places within the ideological and spiritual traditions of each epoch. The Golden Age is that of the polar tradition. It was based in the Arctic regions where days and nights were long and the axis mundi was a steady focus within the night sky. At this time, the traditions of sky and earth worship were in balance. While the sky had ascendancy, the role of earth, albeit in submission, was acknowledged and relevant. The classes as seen within the divine caste system, which reflected the ages of history, were in balance and creativity and intelligence were rewarded. As the polar age ended and migrations from the Arctic were caused by changes in weather patterns, Aryan man spread across the globe and mankind entered the Silver Age. During the Silver or Lunar Epoch, earth cults took ascendancy, the feminine and fertility became of paramount significance, and this led to an emphasis on pagan and Gaia-oriented traditions. The research of Maria Gimbutas and others gives a good outline of the worship that occurred in this period. As the ages unfounded, in reaction against this earthly epoch, the Dionysian or Copper Age began. The worship of strength, violence, masculine virtues, battle against the feminine values, and patriarchal civilizations were formed. While these civilizations were of great historical importance, to achieve their balance they suppressed the lunar or silver cultures and hence existed as a reaction rather than as a creative expression. This being so, it only took so long before the clashes between the two forces dragged man into the current age, that of the Kali Yuga. Now lunar and Dionysian, feminine and masculine, sky and earth are in conflict and battle and will continue so until the age ends in bloodshed. Evola decried the decadent nature of the modern world and its social and political isms and ologies and demanded a return to old world values, which he felt were epitomized by the Teutonic knights, knights who could act as spiritual warriors waging war against the whole corrupt bourgeois modern system. This concept of spiritual warriorship he elucidated most clearly in his radically revisionist book on Buddhism, The Doctrine of Awakening. In The Doctrine of Awakening, Evola offers a radical reassessment of Buddhism and indeed of the Gnostic Handbook, page 62. The Path to Completeness. He argues that the modern monastic approach of Buddhism is alien to Gautama's original intent and suggests that Buddhism was originally a path of action. Accordingly, Evola sees the primal form of Buddhism as centered on a warrior, priest rather than on a monk. He emphasizes the role of aristocracy but in a unique Evolian sense. The term aristocrat here is used in its strictest etymological sense, coming from the Greek word aristos meaning best. The Buddhist disdain for talking about self and God comes not from disbelief, Evola argues, but from a demand for action. There is no self, so create one. There is no God, so become one. This approach is certainly at odds with much that passes for modern Buddhism, and yet in these days of navel-gazing and armchair occultism, one cannot help but be exhilarated by his call to arms. But a simple call is not all of Evola's message. He does not leave us with theory alone. The Doctrine of Awakening re-evaluates the basic tenets of Buddhism and examines them in light of the warrior-priest ethos. Rather than advocating a negative detachment whereby life is experienced at an arm's distance, Evola suggests we experience detachment by riding the tiger, by flowing with the punches, rather than against them. There is no life-editing here, more a transcendence achieved amidst the chaos. At the same time, Evola does not wish to see partial. His approach is that there are many ways to ride the tiger. One can ride slowly and with care, or struggle into the night. One can beat it into submission or lull it with song. Evola other published works, The Yoga of Power and the Hermetic tradition, offer various interpretations of the means to achieve the aristocratic self. Evola's worship of the heroic brings us full circle. It brings us back to the Yugas and the Greek model with its trans equals temporal heroic age. The age of heroes in the Greek system exists outside the time-based cycle of gold, silver, copper and iron. It is that call to go beyond the natural entropy of the cycles and achieve greatness. In Evola's system it is the true solar path, the path of the sun, which leads back to the axis mundi, the polar golden age. The Gnostic Handbook, page 63. The Great Year. The concept of precession is central to the cycle known as the Great or Platonic Year. It is based on the simple fact that the Earth does not sit straight. There is a slight wobble in the Earth's axis as it spins. Accordingly, the North Pole describes a circle taking 2,590 years to reach the point at which it started. As this process unfolds, the vernal equinox is seen to move backwards through the signs. This backwards movement starts at Capricorn and ends at Aquarius, the reverse of the normal yearly cycle. Many have argued that it was Hipparchus in the 2nd century BCE who discovered this, however there is clear evidence that it was known far earlier to the Mayans and Egyptians. This cycle is the basis of many different systems of mythology. De Santillana and von Deckend argue in Hamlet's Mill that the Great Year may indeed be the basis for most cosmological systems. The Gnostic tradition suggests that this great cycle was known to the Atlanteans and was encoded into the rituals and architecture of ancient Egypt. Accordingly, the role of the pharaoh and later the priesthood had a special significance in relation to the unfolding of the Great Year. The Egyptian star Gnosis and the rite of rebirth. The central focus of Egyptian ritualism was the Great Pyramid. It was connected to the Sphinx and operated as an initiatory structure. The pyramid was identified with the sanctuary of the sun and embodied Ra, the solar logos. The rites undertaken in the chamber of the king and queen were rites of rebirth whereby the pharaoh became identified with the solar sphere. He mediated the energies of the logos and hence accelerated the positive current and sublimated or transformed the negative. The sun, like the planets and zodiac, was a doorway between the spiritual and physical worlds and hence emanated forces from the pleroma and from the worlds of the archons. During the rite of rebirth, the pharaoh left his body and traveled through the heavens. He journeyed through the realms of the planets and zodiac using passwords, gestures, and codes. Only after successfully passing the spheres could he then navigate through the Great Barrier and enter the pleroma. This ritual form was connected to the Egyptian astro-gnosis and involved the pharaoh becoming the mediator for his people. In CH-HAPT-TER-RCXX THEEGN NOOS STTICC co-on NCCEPPTT of FTIME2I. The Gnostic Handbook, page 64. This role he also prepared Egypt for the change which took place at the equinox of the gods, when one astrological sign gave way to another. For 180 years before this event, the pharaoh and priesthood would work creating new symbols, mythologies, and astral vessels so that the incoming energy could be utilized for the benefit of Egypt. As time progressed, the Egyptian star Gnosis, the divine rite of rebirth, and the secret of planetary and zodiacal mediation was passed from the pharaoh to a separate priesthood. With time and changes in both state and religion, the teachings were held under oath by secret orders and brotherhoods. Even within the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, we can find elements of the mediation rite within its equinox rituals. However, the emphasis has changed to emanating the forces only for those linked to the order and hence joined to its group mind. As we head further into the Kali Yuga, it is the individual's task to use and transform the heavenly energies within him or herself. It is important to realize that energies the zodiac, like those of the planets, are ambivalent. They receive and relay forces of both positive and negative nature. In a more medieval context, they are said to possess both spirits and intelligences. The Gnostic tradition has always been unsure of astrology and see the heavenly forces as energies which must be reckoned with, not gods to be worshipped. The present change of cycle is that movement from Pisces to Aquarius. While there is some variation in the dating, it is generally accepted that Aquarius will dawn around 2024 with some margin of error. Astrologers fluctuate the dating of the age of Aquarius from between the year 2000 to around 2100. At the change of each sign there is much transformation. For example, the change from Aries to Pisces at approximately 6 BCE triggered a wide range of spiritual manifestations. It would be possible to link Zoroaster, Gautama Buddha, and Jesus James all into the nexus of the movement from Aries to Pisces. Indeed, the imagery of Pisces as the fish has much in common with Jesus and early Christianity. In Egyptian mythology, Horus is also sometimes seen as the fisherman. There are many ways to image the astrological ages. In one Egypt tradition, Isis is related to Taurus, Osiris to Aries, Horus to Pisces, and Maat to Aquarius. The start of the Pyramid Age was linked to Leo, and many believed that the Sphinx was carefully lined to the image of Leo at the horizon, while its forms embodied the priestess of Virgo and the form of the lion as it represented the change from one astrological age to the next, Virgo to Leo. Heraldic cycles. The Platonic year is 25,920 years long, and hence each sign covered 2,160 years. Each of these signs can be further subdivided into minor precessional cycles, each of which is 180 years long. In each astrological age, the first minor cycle is of the same characteristic as that of the greater, hence in Pisces, the first minor cycle of 180 years was that of Pisces of Pisces. The last age of the minor cycle is important as it is preparation for the changeover to the next age. This. The Gnostic Handbook, page 65. Cycle is known as the equinox of the gods. In the present cycle, Pisces began in 1844 and is ruled by Aries. In the Egyptian initiatory traditions, this period was also known as the heraldic cycle. It was the period in which the priesthood prepared the symbolism, legends, and vessels for the influx of energy which would occur at the changeover to the new cycle. The cycle itself encompasses 4 different coordinates. These can be related to the 4 letters of the divine name, YHVH, the 4 elements, the 4 canopic jars of mummification, and the 4 phases of the temple. Heraldic cycle element God name Pisces year. Initiation Fire Yod 1844 Transmission Air He 1904 Consolidation Water Vow 1964 Manifestation Earth He 2024 Horus Sun Head Netter Contents Direction Duamutef Jackal Neath Stomach North Kebsenuf Hawk Selkit Intestines South Happy Baboon Nephthys Lungs East Amset Man Isis Liver West. Probably the most expressive image of the 4 elements of the heraldic cycle are seen reflected in Egyptian temple architecture. The general style of Egyptian temples includes a great court vestibule, hypostyle hall, and the great seat. This design was later adapted into what became the Israelite sanctuary and King Solomon's temple. In general, the Egyptian temple was surrounded by a massive wall of mud brick. This wall isolated the temple from its surroundings, which symbolically represented the forces of chaos. Metaphorically, the mud resulted from the union of heaven and earth. The brick wall itself was therefore set in wavy courses to symbolize the primeval waters, representing the first stage of creation. The exterior walls of the temple resembled a fortress, so as to defend it against all forms of evil. The temple was entered through 2 pylons, beyond which lay an open court. This court sometimes had colonnades along the sides and an altar in the middle. Next, along the temple axis came the hypostyle, a pillared hall often surrounded by small rooms which are used for the storage of temple equipment and for other secondary purposes. Finally, there was the sanctuary, which was a dark room containing the shrine, where the figure of the netter was placed. The Sank. The Gnostic Handbook, page 66. 2 Aries doors were shut and sealed all year long and were open only for the great festivals. The sanctuary was called the Great Seat. Historical Deception, The Untold Story of Ancient Egypt Mustafa Gadala. Bastard Publishing, 1996. The temple symbolized the fourfold process which took place both within the heavens and the activity taken by the priesthood in their ritual activities. It has a specific application within our description of the process of cosmic mediation in the heraldic cycle. If you telescope the imagery, you could image a high priest moving through the stages of the temple, each stage representing a period of activity in which the priesthood has been working and preparing. As he completes each stage, it would represent aspects of the heraldic period. Only at the moment of the movement from one age to the next would he enter the sanctuary and transit the energies to the priesthood and to Egypt. To fully appreciate the heraldic cycle as it leads towards Aquarius, we should examine the 4 dates at the climax of Pisces. From 18,444 to 21,024 we have the Piscean heraldic cycle ruled by the sign of Aries. Aries is ruled by the planet Mars, and hence this suggests the violent and martial tone that Pisces, which is assigned the Egyptian god Horus, has taken in this last age. While Pisces is water, Aries is fire, and hence we have the interaction of will and emotion. While Pisces distributes power, Aries generates it, and hence the combination of these powers brings great changes. The attribution of Horus to Pisces is controversial and will raise the hackles of the disciples of Aleister Crowley, who believe the eon of Horus began with his revelation in 1904. I do not aim to debate the Gnostic versus Thelemite position here. The linked document will cover that in some detail if you want further information. The classic Gnostic position is to align Isis with Taurus, Taurus being the earth goddess. Osiris is assigned to Aries, and at the imagery of the sacrifice of rams to the father god are throughout that period. Horus is Pisces, the imagery is related to Jesus as the fisherman, the ocean of mankind. The fish is Christian symbols, is also founder as a symbol of Horus as fisherman. Horus as a semi-solar image is found throughout religions of that period, Christianity representing the misapplication of Horus to become a violent martial force. Mayad is Aquarius, the outpouring of truth and Gnosis. The first date in our heraldic cycle is 1844. It is the initiation whereby the process of change from Pisces to Aquarius began. There are many other hidden indicators of this date. In the biblical tradition, there are specific prophecies that focus on this date. The 2,300-year prophecy of the cleansing of the sanctuary began in 457 BCE with the declaration of Artaxerxes to restore Jerusalem and ended in 1844. The prophecy focused on the solar sanctuary, and the climax of it is when the sanctuary is transformed when the priest enters the innermost realm, the sacred seat. Some references include Daniel 8:14 and 9:25. The 2,527 times prophecy focused. The Gnostic Handbook, page 67. On the loss of the 10 tribes of Israel to history and the description of their reawakening to the Gnosis started in 1844. This period is also known as the time of the Gentiles and is referenced in Leviticus 26 and under the guise of the prophecy of the 7 times. 1844 as a trigger point for the heraldic cycle is also interesting, as many religions view this as an important date. The Adventists and other Protestant sects of the period preached throughout America that Jesus was returning, and a great disappointment occurred due to a misunderstanding of this prophecy. Modern groups deriving from the Adventists, including Seventh-day Adventists and Branch Davidians, continue to believe that this date was significant and teach that in 1844 Jesus entered the Holy of Holies in the Israelite temple and began an investigative judgment of the dead. During the period from 1844 to an unspecified date, the angels of the Book of Revelation will unveil their messages and mankind will go through great tribulations heading towards the second coming of Jesus. This theology, while in a language different from the Egyptian heraldic cycle, is basically identical. The energy of Christ can be related to the solar force which meditates the astrological cycles, and hence we can easily relate the quasi-Christian imagery to the esoteric tradition. 1904 as the transmission period of the heraldic cycle certainly is expressive. Aleister Crowley declared that in 1904 Aiwass, a being he claimed was a secret chief or master, revealed that a new age was dawning. The matter is made more complex as Crowley interpreted this to mean that the Aeon of Horus had began in 1904. However, from a Gnostic perspective this is unlikely. The Aeon of Horus was the age of Pisces, and Crowley had experienced a further transmission of the energy which was becoming Aquarius. At the same time, this energy restated much of the teachings of the solar tradition since it had become garbled through the ages. However, since this knowledge was filtered through Crowley's unconscious, difficulties arise. The current of 93 he outlined as the Piscean current, agape, love, thelema, will, and logos, word, all are aspects of it, and 93 reduces to 12 the zodiac and of course the 12 disciples, 12 being the sacred number of completion within biblical numerology. There are many difficulties as Crowley disciples transformed his Gnostic vision into a counterculture cult. The relevance is in Crowley Declaration of the Revelation. Further activity of this period include Jehovah's Witnesses who still believe Jesus returned in spirit during this period, 1914 in some groups, but the dates vary. Many other denominations also follow this revelation, so the acceleration of the current certainly has resonance among many traditions. The world wars that occurred during this period could also be considered ramifications of mankind fighting against the transformation current and the counter-gnosis moving into the political dimension. As the energies change, the activities of the dominions and principalities intensify. 1964 was the consolidation of the current in the sense that it as the energies accelerated, society was pushed to the limit. The result being the opening up of the collective psyche, which brought about every possible extreme, politically, sexually, emotional, and spiritually. The counter-gnosis intensified and became dominant in both fundamentalism and the syncretism of the New Age. However, other discoveries such as the Dead Sea Scrolls and Nag Hammadi Library, the Gnostic Handbook, page 68, came into effect in this period and gave rise to the Gnostic revival that continues till this day. 2024 is the approximate date for the manifestation of Aquarius. However, do not expect it to be all love and light. Aquarius is ruled by Saturn or Uranus, depending on whether you use the modern attributions. Saturn is both the demiurge and the divine purifier. Uranus is the lord of the abyss or great barrier between the pleroma and the lower world. Aquarius will be an age of great ferocity, violence, terror, as well as growth and transfiguration for those who seek the light. One of the images associated with Aquarius is the peacock. The peacock was the sacred image of the Yazidi, a Islamic people who followed an ancient Gnostic religious tradition. The peacock was Melek Taus, who can be related to the demiurge, are projections regarding matter, but at the same time the eyes of the peacock, I equals Ayin in Hebrew, the devil tarot card, show us that ultimately dualism has no power, no reality, and hence the real source is beyond in the pleroma and the invisible spirit. Ch pt terar se venn. Th he ko on ntt and nu umm of fth he gn no o c is s. The Gnostic Identity Message. What we know is the Gnostic Identity Message is central to our understanding of the Gnostic tradition. It is difficult to summarize such a complex subject as it demands an extensive study of the evolution of religion, history, and politics to grasp its meaning and even further thought to consider its ramifications. However, we need to at least examine some of the basic concepts on which the Gnostic Identity Message is founded. The crux of the Gnostic Identity Message is a radical reinterpretation of history. From our perspective, this reinterpretation is actually a return to the original essence of the Gnostic traditions. To appreciate these reinterpretations, it is imperative to consider the Bible in its original languages and in the context of the religious ideologies that prevailed at the period it was written. It is also imperative to understand the big picture, which shows where the tradition originated, and to consider the nature of Israel and the Gnostic view of Christianity. Origins. To suggest a common denominator between Gnosticism, Kabbalah, medieval occultism, and Nordic and Vedic sources is to court disaster, at least in the eyes of modern scholarship. However, if we examine the research of those who laid the foundations for modern archaeology and anthropology, there is much evidence for a direct link between these divergent forms, even perhaps evidence of a single source or point of origin. If we take Kabbalah, for example, today promoted as Judaic mysticism, when we examine the scholarly texts on its origins, both by Jewish and non-Jewish sources, they all tend to agree that the Kabbalah had its roots in Greek and Hellenistic philosophy, Gnosticism and Alexandrian Hermeticism, and furthermore, that it was only later adapted by Judaic sources. An authority as respected as Gershom Scholem clearly suggests a strong Greek influence, if not Greek origin, for the Kabbalah. Indeed, he posits the key Kabbalistic glyph of the Tree of Life as having obvious Greek and Gnostic origins. Nag Hammadi texts such as the Secret Book of John and the writings of the Valentinian Gnostic sect all elucidate a hierarchical structure which could be seen as a precursor to later Kabbalistic glyphs and figures. If in turn we take our exploration further and give due consideration to the origins of Greek philosophy and esotericism, an Egyptian influence can be seen clearly on both Pythagoras and Plato. Such scholars as Heinrich Schliemann have noted the similarity between Greek and Vedic forms and suggested a common place of origin. Similar similarities can be found b. The Gnostic Handbook, page 70. Between Nordic and Vedic sources, and hence as we come to speculate on these links, we may begin to conjecture that they are ripples resulting from a stone cast into the primal pool of Gnosis. Ripples that have spread out through cultures, traditions, and peoples, many of which have forgotten the origins of their legends, tales, and philosophy. Julius Evola and many others suggest that this primal culture was based in the Arctic region, and due to severe weather changes, migrations took place to many diverse locations. While an Arctic origin to Vedic culture may seem unusual to modern scholarship, it is exactly what was argued in the Arctic home in the Vedas, 1903, by Bal Gangadhar Tilak. In this work, Tilak argued for an early origin of Vedic culture in the interglacial period and used detailed astronomical and historical research to prove his thesis. He argued that the earliest records were from up to 35,000 BCE, very similar to the pharaoh lists of Manetho, but that the major impetus was circa 10,500–8,000 BCE, when, after the destruction of the original polar home, migrations began. These continued through the period of 8,000–5,000 BCE, with settlements through northern Europe and Asia. It was during the period of 5,000–3,000 BCE, which Tilak calls the Orion period, that the Vedic hymns and sacrificial system were evolved. Other texts evolved between 3,000 and 1,400, when the memory of the original homeland is dim. This theory is all the more challenging when associated with the latest research in dating the Sphinx and early Egyptian culture. The work of John West, Serpent in the Sky, Bouval and Hancock, Keeper of Genesis, Fingerprints of the Gods, The Orion Mystery, and others have significantly pushed back the dating of the foundation of Egypt, maybe to even as early as 10,500 BCE. The latest dating of the Sphinx has a major effect on how we evaluate history. From geological research by Professor Robert Schlock of Boston University, it has been conclusively proven that the Sphinx shows signs of major erosion from rainwater. The evidence suggests that this level of erosion would have demanded a very different environment from today. When this is coupled with the astrological image that the Sphinx encodes, the lion head represents Leo, a likely dating is found around 10,500 BCE. This is when the feet of the Sphinx would be aligned with Leo on the horizon. It also fits well with the erosion evidence. Many see this period, when great cataclysms such as the onset of the last ice age changed the face of the earth and Arctic man was driven to migration, as the source from which later scattered esoteric traditions are the reverberations. This polar culture held within it the key perennial wisdom of its people. This tradition was carried throughout northern Europe and Asia, and it is said that many of the early Vedic hymns can be dated from this period of wandering, 5000–3000 BCE. However, by the time the later Vedic texts were written, circa 3000–1400 BCE, the origins of their tradition had been forgotten. Intricately related to the idea of a polar homeland, there is some debate over Arctic versus Antarctic due to the possibility of a polar shift connected to the Ice Age, is the work of Rand and Rose Flamath. In When the Sky Fell, they offer extensive research to show the likelihood of. The Gnostic Handbook, page 71. The location of the legendary land of Atlantis being one and the same as the polar homeland, now covered in ice. It is suggested by Blavatsky, The Secret Doctrines, that it is from this primal, polar land that various races spread throughout the globe. There is some debate about the exact number of migrations. There is general agreement certainly that major settlements were made in Tibet, India, Sumer, Egypt, and South America. It is from the Sumer, Egypt basin that the Israelite mysteries developed. The Israel connection. Developing from the theory above, we have the fascinating studies by Ahmed Osman and others. These suggest clearly a direct link between what was supposed to be Judaism and Egypt. This evidence proves fairly conclusively in many people's minds that Moses and Akhenaten were the same people and that the Israelites were his followers escaping from Egypt. This model certainly revisions the Old Testament as we start to realize that Judaism in this earlier phase had little to do with what we see as Rabbinic Judaism today. The evidence is then they developed a large desert culture with an emphasis on a god and a goddess, and that most Old Testament stories were written at a much late date and were distorted by the then fundamentalist and nationalist priesthood. To appreciate this, we should revisit the Old Testament and see what we can find. Yahweh in reconsidering the Bible. There is more to the Old Testament than first meets the eye, and its study opens up a Pandora's box of issues we need to consider. Modern scholars believe that the Old Testament is not a coherent whole. When it is subjected to biblical criticism, it is found that there are at least 3 different streams of information within it. The El stream, the Yahwahist stream, and the priestly stream. The El stream is the very earliest. It seems to represent the pagan traditions of Canaan and surroundings. Within this tradition, the gods are known as El, or the mighty ones. One of the more important is Baal. Associated with these gods are goddesses. The major being is known as Atharoth. Together, Baal and Atharoth form the basis of the pagan Canaanite tradition. As Israel became more nationalistic and political, the El tradition was suppressed. At the same time, a fundamentalist and literalistic stream arose within the society, and this new tradition was the Yahwahist stream. Yahweh becomes the mighty one, Baal is vanquished and replaced with the tradition of the coming warrior Messiah, with the goddess relegated to the shadows. The history of Israel is, in some sense, the battle between these two streams or religious traditions, and between these two streams in the Gnosis. In studying the Old Testament, we need to realize that it is not the Word of God but a remnant, a historical record of what occurred within Israel at that period. While it contains scraps of the original mysteries, it is not primarily a religious text but a mixture of myths, legends, histories, and interpretations. While certainly the esoteric keys are found hidden throughout its pages, we must also be aware of the distortions of the Gnosis that exist within it. The priestly stream, that of the scribe, rightly belongs beyond the Old Testament. It occurred. The Gnostic Handbook, page 72. After the captivity in Babylon, when Yahwehist scribes took control of diaspora Israel and Babylon and remolded Judaism into a new form. This new form was based on literalist and fundamentalist, not Gnostic values. The Yahwehist tradition was embodied, the El demolished, and the priest class was edited into the Old Testament to make it seem supreme. The Old Testament, as such, is a very edited book. It was written by a priest class which existed a long time after the original events, and a class which wanted to destroy the traditional power of the Kadesh, see later discussion of this group, and mold the Yahwehist tradition into a militaristic style cult. This molded Old Testament, combined with the Talmud, became the text of modern Jewry. When the Israelites migrated to other lands after the Assyrian captivity, they re-established many of the Gnostic traditions. Hence, the Druids and those of the Celtic faith probably had more in common with the original Israelite Gnosis than modern Judaism and Christianity. We can see how the struggle between various divergent traditions has been edited into the Old Testament. Joseph's coat of many colors, for example, a Sumerian symbol of a Kadesh priest, became a simple piece of clothing. Baal has been demonized to become the enemy of the people of Israel, yet we know that the early priests of Israel actually accepted Baal as part of their faith, and there are other examples too numerous to mention. In some sense, the creation story and other tales in the Old Testament echo this rewriting of history. While they certainly contain images and icons of the original Aryan faith, they also reflect the distorted tradition established by the Pharisaic priesthood. One of the best examples of this is the image of the serpent. The serpent was a sacred symbol of the Israelite tradition. Throughout the Old Testament, it is also used as a symbol of wisdom. Moses uses a serpent to heal the people of Israel. In Gematria, the serpent has the same numerical as the Christ and is seen as a type of Jesus. Yet, at the same time, the serpent is cursed in the priestly rendition of Genesis and seen as a symbol of evil. And the Lord said unto Moses, Make thee a fiery serpent, and set it upon a pole, and it shall come to pass, that every one that is bitten, when he looketh upon it, shall live. Numbers 21:8. The serpent clearly is the symbol of Gnosis, wisdom, and the earliest traditions. Again, while we can see remnants of the Gnostic faith in the myths and legends of Genesis, we can also see clearly the later addition of elements that the fundamentalist priesthood could use to fight against the Israelite tradition. While we do not aim to try and summarize the Kadesh tradition here, it was an inner esoteric tradition that embodied a special form of technology aimed at transforming man into God deification. It represented the highest class within the spiritual hierarchy and included forms of shamanism, ritual technology, and Gnostic science. It was the esoteric heart of the Israelite people, regardless of the nature of the outer forms. It was similar to the inner grades of the Essenes and Gnostic sects and is at the heart of the Gnostic faith. The Gnostic Handbook, page 73. The Sacred Serpent. The serpent is an image central to the Gnosis. While this may at first seem unusual, when we come to appreciate the esotericism of the serpent, we can understand its significance. The major problem which arises with the iconography of the serpent or snake is the prejudice found in most Christian literature. This all too clearly, however, comes from a misunderstanding of the image and distortion found in the Old Testament text. The Bible as a whole has an ambivalent view of the serpent or snake. On one hand, it seems to be represented as evil, even as an icon of the devil himself, while on the other it is used to represent wisdom and even perhaps salvation. The most obscure image is that found in Numbers 21:8-9 and Isaiah 15:29, where the serpent is used as an image of redemption. Moses holds up the serpent on a cross to heal Israel. Most Christian scholars agree that this is a type of the coming Messiah, in Christian terms, Jesus himself. Accordingly, we have the unusual suggestion of the serpent is Jesus. In Hebrew numerology, the numerical value of the serpent or snake is that of the Messiah. Many Gnostic sects saw the serpent as the agent of redemption and the primary symbol of Gnosis. Theophites, from the Greek word for serpent, ophis, like many modern Gnostic groups, ourselves included, believed that the serpent of the Genesis story was a representative for the Lord of Light, as was Jesus, while the Creator depicted in the Old Testament was seen as the demiurge. It has been suggested that since there was no town known as Nazareth existing in the 1st century Common Era, that the epithet Nazarene may actually be Nosarene, which means the serpentine and refers to Jesus' ancestry within the Gnostic communion. The iconography of the serpent links the Gnostics with the earliest occult traditions. In ancient Egypt, the serpent was the symbol of duality. It was both creative and destructive. Since it had both a forked tongue and dual penis, it was used to represent the potentials for good and evil within sexuality and the intellect. As the serpent of earth, it represented that which destroys, the constant returning to the earthly cycles. In this representation it was reproductive, earthbound and destructive. While for the Egyptians the heavenly serpent was that which gave man the knowledge to perceive the divine. The Egyptians were well aware that serpents don't fly, but by giving the serpent wings they emphasized the unique difficulty of going beyond the earthly cycles. The shedding of skin was a useful image for the cycle of eternal reoccurrence whereby all things repeat until final annihilation or liberation is achieved. The serpent then could be understood as representing the knowledge of good and evil. In its destructive mode it represents out attachments to the material world. In its heavenly mode it represents the secret knowledge of the light. To achieve this secret knowledge one must transmute the instincts, the dual penis, and the intellect, the forked tongue, as well as going beyond the cycles of ordinary life, the shedding of the skin. The Gnostic Handbook, page 74. Within the traditions of Gnosticism, the serpent is used to represent the path of the pneumatic, the highest path to the treasury of light. In our tradition, as in the Valentinian Gnostic school, there were three grades: the hylic, psychic, and pneumatic. The hylic was that of everyday man. It was sometimes represented by a crawling serpent, the snake of earth. The hylic is the bulk of humanity. It has little innate spark of life and generally is a creature of instinct. The psychic was the first path of salvation and was represented by the dove. The psychic is a mixture of light, mind, and flesh and is dominated by his lower instincts. He needs the guidance of the Gnostic school to achieve liberation. The secret path was that of the serpent of light, the winged serpent. This path is followed by the pneumatics. The parfait are children of the pleroma. The duality represented by the snake is very expressive. In some ways it hints at the secret techniques used within the higher path. The very things that condemn the hylic to earth are turned and used to liberate the pneumatic. The serpent, and related images such as the snake and dragon, is therefore an expressive image of the nature of the gnosis. The winged serpent represents the highest wisdom, while the crawling serpent represents the decay of earth. The duality of the snake is the dualism of the ancient wisdom. Israel on the world stage. If we continue from our Egyptian Israelite model, the next question is what happened to the Israelite community? The historical evidence suggested that the priest class created a literalist, fundamentalist cult which came to the forefront in Judaism after the time of Jesus. But where did the earlier Israelites go? We know that ancient Israel, whose capital was Samaria, was taken captive by the Assyrians in 721 BC, and yet after this traditional history tells us that the 10 tribes are lost. But is this really so? Or has history also been twisted by scribes and politicians? We know that Josephus, writing in 70 CE, states the 10 tribes did not return to Palestine. Only 2 tribes serviced the Romans after Palestine became a Roman province. According to 2nd Esdras, a book within the New Testament Apocrypha, the 10 tribes moved 1,000 miles west to southeast Russia to become the people history knows as the Scythians. In Race and Civilization, Roger Pearsons writes, Nordic Scythians overran Palestine in the 7th century BC, and the history of the Sassi or Scythians with their many tribes and branches is well worth following. They originated in southeast Europe and moved through Asia as far as Turkestan and Afghanistan, even into India to the Indus. Many early writers, such as Polemon of Ilium, Gallianos, Clement of Alexandria, Adamantos, state that the Scythians were similar to the Celts and Germans, being fair or ruddy in hue. Ancient historians including Ptolemy and Herodotus and modern historians such as Gibbon have also affirmed that the captive tribes of Israel were known through various periods as Guduk, Gadai, Gauls, Goths, Manda, Dacians, Teutons, Normans, Angli, Suka, Scythians, and Saxons. All these people were of the same racial stock and heritage as ancient Israel. Now it is possible that Israel disappeared in one section of the world and the progenitors of the Anglo-Saxon Celtic. The Gnostic Handbook, page 75. People appeared in the same place a few years later without the two peoples being in any way related, but hardly probable. The overwhelming circumstantial evidence makes it appear that the lost tribes of Israel and the progenitors of the Anglo-Saxon Celtic people were one and the same. And when, in addition to the circumstantial evidence, cognizance is taken that these people have fulfilled what the prophets wrote of Israel, the probability becomes a certainty. Sharon Turner. To really understand the nature of the early Israelite tradition, they need to be seen as indigenous mystery cults passed down from father to son. This is the meaning of the world Kabbalah and embodying the secrets of creation. When Israel was taken into captivity, a large segment of these teachings went with her and were transmitted to different locations around the globe, and remnants remain in forms alien to what many would consider to be Judaic or Christian at all. One of the major focus points of this tradition was within Ireland and England. The Druid connection. A classic example is found in the Druidic traditions. It is believed by many that the Druids became the priest class of Israel in exile after they had settled in Ireland and England. Many facets of the early Druidic faith resemble what we know of the original Israelite mysteries. The secret alphabet which the Israelites used was sustained by the Druids and for mnemonic purposes was related to trees, and later to birds and animals. The Druids also met in outdoor sanctuaries. Certainly the original Israelite way of worship kept to their own and sustained a priesthood which had much in common with the Kadesh. Certainly the native religion of the Celts and many other Indo-Europeans betray a strong similarity to the Israelite traditions. One interesting fact to note is that according to many modern linguists, the Welsh language has more words taken from Hebrew than any other language worldwide. This and many other historical facts suggest that the traditions of early England, rather than being darkly pagan, were actually Gnostic and probably embodied more truth than what was being taught in the churches that were attacking them for heresy. A later tradition regarding the relationship of Jesus to the Druids adds even further light on these connections. In regards to Jesus traveling to Britain, the details are sketchy but reliable. The evidence suggests that Israel was more of a cosmopolitan region than many scholars have realized. It had links with many peoples and many cultures. Joseph of Arimathea was a very rich man, and it is now believed he bought and traded tin and other items from bases in England, probably Cornwall and Somerset. We know that after the death of Jesus around AD 63 St. Philip actually sent Joseph and others back to England to preach the gospel. Refer. Victory of Aurelius Ambrosius by Gildad Albanicus. In regards to Jesus traveling to Britain with Joseph, there are many traditions in Somerset and other localities that certainly suggest same. It is even suggested that the Gnostic Handbook, page 76. Very location of Glastonbury Cathedral is where Jesus and Joseph built their hut on their first trip to Britain. In the western confines of Britain there is a certain royal island of large extent, surrounded by water, abounding in all the beauties of nature and necessaries of life. In it the first neophytes of Catholic law, God beforehand acquainting them, found a church constructed by no human art but divinely constructed by the hands of Christ himself for the salvation of his people. The Almighty has made it manifest by many miracles and mysterious visitations that he continues to watch over it as sacred to himself. A letter from St. Augustine to Pope Gregory. Amazing as it may seem, even the Druids believed that Jesus came to Britain and taught them the esoteric teachings. For example, Taliesin, the bard and Druid, circa AD 550, states, Christ, the Word from the beginning, was from the beginning our teacher, and we never lost his teachings. There are many volumes examining the details of Jesus' trek to Britain. Some of the more important examine the historical record of Glastonbury, which can be traced right back to the chapel built by Jesus himself. For this reason, the site has continued to remain sacred and became the center of other important legends and religious tales such as King Arthur and his knights. Obviously, since Britain was the destination for so many of the lost tribes of Israel, we may expect that it would be of primary importance for the early spreading of the message. From many accounts, Ireland and England were the first countries outside Palestine to receive the Christian message. The Essene link. Connected to these migrations is another very important link. When some of the people of Judah returned to Palestine after the captivity, not all accepted the Roman rule and integrated into the secular state. Though the Pharisees and Sadducees continued the fundamentalism form of Judaism, some of those who returned kept the original Israelite faith and separated themselves off into the deserts. Though this group traveled from location to location, around approximately 180 BC, they formed a secret communal order to sustain the ancient mysteries in the deserts of Palestine. This group kept separate from the rest of the local peoples but kept contacts with Greek and perhaps even Egyptian mystery cults. They were not insular but taught a form of the mysteries with both Israelite, Greek, and Egyptian elements. This group was known as the Essenes and forms an important link in the survival of the Gnosis through the dark time from Constantine's rule to the present. The Gnostic Handbook, page 77. If it is true, as everyone attests, that Moses left an oral law, it is amongst the Essenes that it was preserved. The Pharisees, who flattered themselves so highly on possessing it, only has its outward forms, as Jesus reproaches them at every moment. It is from these latter that the modern Jews descend. La langue hébraïque, fabre de Livit. While we will study the Essenes in more detail later, they form an important background, as it is from them that Jesus came and re-established the Gnostic faith. They are not an easy group to understand as they were in some sense transitionary. While they tried to keep the original Israelite faith, they were also corrupted by many local customs, laws and beliefs, and hence while their hearts were in the right place, their beliefs were not. Their value is more in the bridge they created for the Gnostic traditions and Jesus than in their own doctrinal stance. Jesus was not a Jew racially or by geography, he was a Galilean. He was certainly not a Jew by religion either, but an Israelite in the Essene sense. In this context, we can then see how Gnosticism, or real Christianity, developed out of the Israelite Essenes, not the fundamentalist or literal Judaism of the Pharisees. They, the Essenes, were not waiting to receive the law, they already possessed it. Their aim was to deliver it from the realms of darkness in which it had been engulfed. The Torah, that is, the divine teachings as revealed to Moses, had, it was held, been successively perverted by false expositors. The Dead Sea Scriptures. Theodore Gaster. Doubleday, N.Y. The Essenes, Jesus and the Foundations of Gnosticism. The work of Jesus is central to the transformation of the Gnostic tradition. Jesus is a pre-existent spirit. The archangel Michael took human form so he could show the way back to the pleroma. He was born and lived as a human with the same potential for failing, same potential for suffering as all humans. He experienced the tides of the material world and overcome them. He traveled the world in his so-called missing years, studying in both India and Britain, bringing the threads of the mystery tradition to a common climax, while at the same time achieving a mastery of himself and the world around him. The baptism of Jesus shows clearly his high state of initiation. His energy field has been cleansed of its fallen elements by Sophia, and in recognition of his achievement, the divine will acknowledges his new state. Michael is now Jesus the Christ state being the achievement of communication with the mind of God or the Logos. The Gnostic Handbook, page 78. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and lighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, whom I love, with him I am well pleased." Matthew 3:16, 17. Jesus was now in a position to transform the human situation. As a Son of God, a being whose essence is in commune with the Logos and whose actions embody the Holy Spirit, he now went about his task of redeeming Israel. He was the Messiah from the land of light come for his people. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions: do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans, go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. As you go, preach this message: the kingdom of heaven is near. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. Matthew 10:5-7, Matthew 15:24. Jesus, however, had more to achieve than simply transmit the Gnosis to Israel. Jesus had to initiate the current which would open the door to the mysteries. By being initiated into the Essenes, he brought Greek mystery traditions and Israelite wisdom together. By being trained by the Israelites, he has a link back to Egypt, also through the Greek. His travels in England and India brought into pagan and Hindu, Buddhist wisdom, so the Christ literally brought together many streams of esotericism into one font of secret wisdom. This teaching was certainly for Israel, but in a new sense, it was for those prepared for initiation, not for any discrete historical, cultural, or racial class alone. This gnosis or secret knowledge clearly inferred that doctrine or belief was not enough. Jesus himself had to spiritually transform the nature of the material plane, so a new current, a new vibration was available which offers redemption from our false perceptions and our self-created imprisonment. The Gnostic Handbook, page 79. The aim of life. The aim of life is to offer man a chance to gain salvation, to enter the path of transfiguration. Since time immemorial, the Pleroma has outlined an escape route, a path by which man may awaken the true self and grasp the gift of immortality. And immortality is a gift. In all mythologies, we find a quest for immortality, a trial that leads to a reward of life eternal. In the 12 labors of Hercules, we have a series of initiations which lead to eternal life, while in the quest for the golden fleece of immortality, we have Jason overcoming immense odds to grasp it. The divine will offers man many chances to gain immortality, and these chances take place in many lives. Reincarnation within Gnostic thought is not the same as it is within Eastern philosophy. Reincarnation occurs within a limited period and offers the opportunity for immortality. It is not an immortal soul gaining experience, but a mortal self being offered opportunity on opportunity to enter the spiritual path. Reincarnation is also limited in time. While we do not know the number of lives or opportunities man is given, there is a limited time allotment after which the cycle is completed and unredeemed life sparks cease to individually exist, unless they have been reawakened by transfiguration. The Bible and reincarnation. Now you may react by arguing that there is no biblical authority for reincarnation. However, I am afraid that you would be very, very wrong. In the early Christian church there were many that taught reincarnation. Clement of Alexandria, Origen, Jerome, Gregoras, Augustine and Irenaeus to name but a few. It was only during the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD that the concept of reincarnation became unpopular, and this was coupled with the development of teachings regarding the Trinity, eternal hellfire, purgatory and other dogmas which were imported into the church for political reasons by Emperor Constantine. It was only in AD 553 at the Second Council of Constantinople that reincarnation was finally and formally condemned. In regards to scripture itself, it is obvious that church copyists have removed many of the classic reincarnation references. However, references still do occur if you look closely and carefully analyze what you read. In the book of Revelation, we have an exciting description of what will occur at the end of the earth cycle when the born again, the spiritually transformed, enter the new kingdom. As part of the description, the following is outlined. CH-HIAPT TRAIGGHHTT Koan NDD ATIO na LLIM mo or RT ta LLI at TIY and RE and NCCARRN na TIO on N. The Gnostic Handbook, page 80. Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out, and I will write upon him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, which is New Jerusalem, which cometh down out of heaven from my God, and I will write upon him my new name. Revelation 3:12. This verse clearly explains that those who have overcome, that is, those who completed their spiritual development, will become a pillar in the temple of God, and he shall go out no more, that is, he will reincarnate no longer. This is obviously the message intended in this verse. Also, when we examine the Gospels, we find Jesus asking the disciples, "Who do they think I am?" You would think that when the disciples answer in terms of reincarnation, that if this was incorrect, Jesus would certainly correct them. Surely he would not let them continue in their ignorance. But no, Jesus accepts what they say but simply corrects them in regards to his own identity. When Jesus came into the coasts of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Whom do men say that I the Son of Man am?" And they said, "Some say that thou art John the Baptist, some, Elias, and others, Jeremias, or one of the prophets." He saith unto them, "But whom say ye that I am?" And Simon Peter answered and said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." Matthew 16:13. We can then continue and note that in Matthew 17:10-13 Jesus informs them that he could not be Elias, as Elias has already returned as John the Baptist. "But I say unto you that Elias is come already, and they knew him not." This is very obviously a description of reincarnation. Another excellent example is the commentary on Luke 12:58-59 offered by Carpocrates, a Gnostic leader from the 3rd century. As you are going with your adversary to the magistrate, try hard to be reconciled to him on the way, or he may drag you off to the judge, and the judge turn you over to the officer, and the officer throw you into prison. I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. Luke 12:58-9. Carpocrates explains that the true meaning of this tale is that the opponent is the demiurge, our perception of matter, and that the jail is the body, the fallen material world, itself. No one can escape reincarnation until all earthly actions have been experienced. The Gnostic Handbook, page 81. Rather than continuing to analyze each verse one by one, let me just give you a couple by themselves to consider. "But they which shall be accounted worthy to obtain that world, and the resurrection from the dead, neither marry, nor are given in marriage, neither can they die any more, for they are equal unto the angels, and are the children of God, being the children of the resurrection. Now that the dead are raised, even Moses showed at the bush, when he calleth the Lord the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Luke 20:35-37. "But thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall he come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting." Micah 5:2. I think from these references it becomes quite clear that reincarnation was taught by the early Gnostic Christian Church, and even though the Bible has gone through constant editing and rewriting, reincarnation still survives into the modern translations. The mechanism of reincarnation. To understand the way in which reincarnation works, we have to examine the effects of our actions. Now, in generally held Christian views, there is a belief that actions do not have an effect. We ask for forgiveness and all is gone. This is obviously not correct. Every action has an effect. Even if the moral, and the if is big, punishment was removed from an act by asking for forgiveness, the natural effect of that act remains. For example, I get hepatitis from a heroin injection. While I may be forgiven for damaging my temporal physical vehicle, I still have to deal with the disease. This process of cause and effect is found in many different traditions. In some forms of Eastern philosophy, it is known as sanskaras or karma. If a soul, when it has entered the body, persists in evil, it does not taste the fruits of life eternal, but is dragged back again. It reverses its courses and takes its way back to creeping things, and that ill-fated soul, having failed to know itself, lives in servitude to uncouth and noxious bodies. In this doom are vicious souls condemned. Hermes. The Gnostic Handbook, page 82. In the Western tradition, it is figuratively called the Book of Judgment. This book is a balance sheet of the actions of the person as he reincarnates. As time progresses, the positive and negative attributes of a person's life weigh against each other, and the person continues to reincarnate. At various stages, the balance will reach a crucial stage, and accordingly, the circumstances of a person's life will drastically change to give them a further opportunity to enter transfiguration. These opportunities continue until the Omega Day, when the cycle draws to a close. If the person has entered the spiritual life, then during these stages a slow and steady transformation of the mind into true self will occur. This process is called transfiguration, and the born-again person's name is figuratively transferred to the book of life. No longer is a record kept of action and reaction, but a record of growth and spiritual transformation. He that overcometh, the same shall be clothed in white raiment, and I will not blot out his name out of the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father, and before his angels. Revelation 3:5. Transfigurism aims at nothing more nor less than demolition of the old microcosm, including the lower and higher self, and building a totally new lower and high self, from the root substance of the original kingdoms. The Coming Revolution, J. Van Rijkenborg. The mechanism and aim of reincarnation is clear. Reincarnation is a process by which the divine will uses the experiences of our lives to awaken us to his spiritual truth. The opportunities for liberation are limited, and the clock of cause and effect, the book of judgment, is ticking away. If we ignore the opportunities enough, then at the Omega Day we may end up simply ceasing to exist. If we accept the opportunity, then our names are transferred to the book of life and our transformation begins. Heaven and Hell. Having studied this far, you still may have many questions regarding the Gnostic view of reincarnation, and you may wonder about the Judaic and Christian views regarding heaven and hell. Accordingly, we shall examine them for a moment. Heaven and hell are symbols. Within the Bible there is clearly more than meets the eye when we consider the various Hebrew and Greek terms used for them. The problem that arises when critically considering heaven and hell in the biblical text is the problem of textual distortion. One of the easiest ways to come to an honest understanding is to let the original terms speak for themselves. For example, there are many different terms for hell. Like the many differing names of God, the various modern copyists have tended to use one word in numerous locations, where in real. The Gnostic Handbook, page 83. There are multiple words in the original Hebrew or Greek, which each offer many possible interpretations. Hell on earth. The term Sheol is used a lot in the Bible and is used in the Old Testament, can be interchanged with grave, pit, and abode of the dead. It is used to describe the state of the dead in relation to earth. The dead have no consciousness in relation to earth as they have returned to it. The grave, or the state of being dead, without consciousness, is used to represent the lack of awareness the reincarnating soul has of the earth's sphere. Time and time again this term is used to refer to cessation of activity and not in reference to an eternal fire or to any spiritual realm. Hell, first, it stands for the Hebrew Sheol of the Old Testament and the Greek Hades of the Septuagint and the New Testament. Sheol in Old Testament times referred simply to the abode of the dead and suggested no moral distinctions. The word hell as understood today is not a happy translation. Collier's Encyclopedia, 1986 volume 12 pg 28. The term Hades is the New Testament equivalent of the Hebrew Sheol and therefore has the same meaning: the grave, or in esoteric terms, the astral plane where a soul resides between incarnations and returns to earth again and again and again. The general tone of these biblical terms are negative, that is, that the process of returning to the grave and returning back to earth is painful and destructive. From a Gnostic perspective, this is certainly true. The other term regularly used for hell explains this even better. Gehenna, used in the New Testament, has a very specific meaning and symbolism. It literally refers to the valley of Hinnom and hence can only be understood in the context of what this valley represented. The valley of Hinnom was located outside the walls of Jerusalem and was a large rubbish dump. Fires were triggered by the adding of sulfur so that the rubbish could be burned up. It became the common lay stall of the city, where the dead bodies of criminals and the carcasses of animals and every other kind of filth was cast. Smith's Bible Dictionary. It is such an apt description of how we experience the darker aspects of our world, into which we are forced to reincarnate criminals, carcasses of animals, and every kind of filth. When we die, the body is eaten by animals or burnt by sulfur, or in more modern terms, cremated or buried, and our soul then again must return. This sort of eternal reoccurrence, hell on earth, is the iconography of Hades, Sheol, and Gehenna. It is the real meaning of hell. The Gnostic Handbook, page 84. While we may see the world as a form of the divine and should avoid unnecessary dualism in regards to our bodies and matter, in the end we must also accept that the world is a temporal schoolhouse and one that includes a lot of pain and suffering in its teaching method. Hell, then, is not some eternal location to which we are damned in the future. Indeed, in the Gnostic tradition, the end of those not awakened is simply oblivion, nothingness, ceasing to exist. If there is any hell with torture and gnashing of teeth, it is the world in which are now exiled. What is heaven? The Hebrew shamayim, always used in the plural, is translated heavens but basically means high or lofty. It is used to refer to the atmosphere of earth, such as in Dude 4:17, Proverbs 30:19, outer space, Heb 11:12, Isa 13:10, the sky, Isa 45:8, and a range of other localities. The term is also used to refer to the higher worlds. In some ways it can be used to both refer to the astral worlds, the lower heavens, and the true heavens, the pleroma, above. Ch ha pt te r ni and nei.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. Please stay tuned for part 2.